Okay, so we're going to start the workshop portion of our meeting, which will take us until 7:30, at which point we'll formally open the formal agenda. So with that, John Clark suggested we start discussion about the concept at this point of amending our laws to remove the requirement for parking, and I'm overgeneralizing, right? So John will get into more specifics. So take it away, John.
Yeah, no one's at this point proposing eliminating parking standards in the city, but there are discussions about at least reforming the parking standards in the city. There are early discussions, nothing is on the table yet. So I thought I'd give you some background information. Oh, why is that? I don't know. Here we go.
There we go.
Bit too much of a pause, I guess. So this is a couple graphics from the Main Street Access Committee report. We'll start with Main Street.
Want to miss that?
The theory going back to the 70s was that the city would provide public parking along Main Street behind the businesses with big parking lots. And this is the legacy. You can see all the gray areas where there are parking lots that are run by the city. It's over 9 acres of land, over 400,000 square feet. That's a lot of land that's set aside for nothing but parking. And when the Main Street Access Committee looked at all this, they said, well, you know, there's a lot of complaints about not enough parking on Main Street. So they looked at a variety of different options. And the first option they took was to increase the amount of parking spaces without increasing the amount of asphalt. So take the existing parking lots, the existing streets, and make them more efficient. And by doing that, we found something in the neighborhood of 130-some spaces you could add just by striping or reconfiguring lots. And that would sort of help in the short term. And then there were sort of longer term considerations. I was going to show you some of those. One of them is that that's a lot of land to set aside for parking that's just for parking. There's no reason why, for instance, you couldn't build above the parking lots and make those lands productive in terms of tax generation and business and housing and the rest of the things that the city needs. So another thing they did was to do a parking survey to figure out where things are bad and how bad they are. And so they picked a sunny October day right in the middle of the leaf season, which is sort of peak tourist time around here, on a Saturday afternoon. Sunny day. And they counted every car on the public streets. And if you look at it, there's over 1,600 spaces, public spaces, either on Main Street or within a block of Main Street. That's a lot of parking. And when you look at how they broke down, if you look where the red areas are, that's where things were filled. Main Street itself was more or less packed, and the East End parking lots were full or close to full. When you back off, the Eliza Street lot was filled, but the two Henry Street lots were not. The County Center lot, which is a big parking lot, was only 50% full. And there was a lot of parking on the side streets. So if you look at the percentages, if you want to park right in front of the store on Main Street, tough luck. But if you wanted to go a block or so away, there was parking. And that was on a peak day, not a Tuesday afternoon or a February Sunday or whatever. So the story was, the generation was, is that we don't have a severe problem yet, but it's getting there. Numbers are worse than they were in 2014 when the last parking survey was done. And especially on the East End, things were very tight. And, people don't want to walk down that hill and have to walk back up to a parking space on Henry Street, for instance. And you can park in the middle of Main Street where there was parking and take the free bus down if that's where you wanted to go, but people aren't inclined to do that. So there's different ways to attack the problem. One is to make the parking lots more efficient. This is an example of an inefficient parking lot. The county center lot has 92 total spaces. Takes up a huge chunk of that property, including the corner facing Main Street. You could reconfigure the lots, make it more efficient, you get 113 spaces, 21 more parking spaces, and you can put a building and a green space on the front end of the parcel. So you could make that lot a lot more efficient and make it buildable and hide the parking at the same time. Right now, there's no landscaping in that lot, not a single tree. And you could provide landscaping as well and screen the parking to the back. So there's ways of doing that, coming up with efficient parking solutions that still involve surface lots. Another way is to build over the lot. Here's a concept study I did for the Henry Street lot behind the diner and Town Crier. Right now, there's 72 spaces there. They're used quite a bit. But you could put a 3 or maybe even a 4-story building on that parcel. It's in the commercial district. And put parking underneath. And even have apartments facing Henry Street so it doesn't look like a parking structure. It's all hidden behind. And you lose 5 parking spaces. So you could get the bulk of the parking would remain there and be available, and still have a productive lot in which you're not heating up asphalt all day in the summertime. So that's sort of the next step. And then there's another concept. You could go a little further and you could create actually more parking than there's there already. So this is a study we did for the parking lot down by the brewery off Churchill Street, which is not a great place to have a parking lot next to the creek frontage. But it's highly used. So this is where the biggest parking crunch is. So using the hill to take advantage of the hill, you could have an entrance on one level and an entrance on the other level, so you don't have to have internal ramps. It makes the parking more efficient. And you could fit 147 spaces on that parcel, where right now there's only 50-some. So you get a net gain of 94 spaces on 2 levels. And then you could also put 2 layers of housing above it and 2 layers of housing on the creek side to shield it from the creek trail. And so you get a net gain of parking plus housing and a nicer parcel, presumably, if you have good architecture. So there's sort of, and then you could go to the full-blown, just a parking structure with liner buildings. That's been proposed as well on the Eliza Street lot. So there's a lot of different options out there. The Access Committee proposed a 3-step process. Add more parking just by restriping and being more efficient. The second one is to look at paid parking. You can control parking by controlling the price. And since the primary crunch for parking is on the weekends when it's really tourist generation and not residentially generated, why not make the people who are visiting Beacon pay for some of the upkeep of all that parking? It's very expensive to maintain all those lots.
Yeah.
And Beacon's taxpayers are paying for those lots, even though the peak parking crunch, where everybody complains that it is really generated by the tourists, not by the residents. And then the third one was to go to parking structures, which is expensive. It's a lot of people don't like parking structures. It takes up space. You can make them look nice. There's a variety of different ways you can shield the parking structures. A lot of people do good jobs on parking structures. It's better than surface lots because it's more land efficient, but it's still adding more parking to try to meet the demand rather than coming up with alternative strategies. So another way that people are addressing this issue is to look at parking requirements altogether, sort of
Yep.
rethink the big idea. And, you know, they start with the question, what does it say about our values that housing for cars is mandatory in all proposed uses in the city and is almost always free? Whereas housing for people is restricted in many ways and always expensive. We're really valuing cars over people, or housing for cars instead of for people, because if you look at parking lots, they typically represent 10 to 20% of the total housing cost of a project, adds 17% to the average apartment's rent. And there's a lot of people who don't have cars or don't need cars. You can get by with walking and public transit in a place like Main Street in Beacon. And since lower income people are less likely to have cars, it's actually a very regressive way of looking at life, because the people least likely to use the parking are required to pay more for it out of their rents. The other argument is that our parking regulations in Beacon haven't been updated in any general way since the 1970s. And family formation was completely different in the 70s in terms of the number of people per household and that sort of thing. So the parking standards we have are way overdone in terms of the amount of parking they require. So the average size of Beacon household has gone down 26% over that period, with a lot more one and two person households than there used to be. But we still require 2 spaces per every single family home, and in many places more than that for multifamily. The 2021 census, the American Community Values Census, 28% of Beacon's working class residents have 0 or 1 car available to them. So there's a lot of households out there being required to provide space for parking that don't need it.
Sorry, what was that statistic?
28% of Beacon's working age residents have 0 or 1 car available to them.
Where did that come from?
The American Community Survey, which is a 5-year rolling survey of people.
So 28% of households,
Beacon residents have 0 or 1 car available.
28% of residents have
Yeah.
0 or 1 car. Oh, okay.
Of working age. Working age.
Working age, yeah, they don't count below. Yes, there was a breakdown in which some people have a lot, but most people only have 1 or 2 cars per household. So one way of looking at this is there's several arguments that have been expressed about, and it's mainly in the context of our decision, talking about affordable housing, how to make more affordable housing. So if you require less parking, you can lower rents in theory, because they don't have to spend so much on land and upkeep of parking lots. They can put more units on a given piece of property than they could otherwise. And so that would drive down rents, or at least maybe stabilize rents. So several things have been discussed. One is to eliminate parking standards for affordable units. So as an incentive to build below market rate units, you wouldn't require parking for them. People who have less money have fewer cars, and it makes some sense. And it's like an incentive that you can provide for a developer, so that if they're providing 10% affordable units, then they would have to have 10% fewer cars in their parking lot. So that's one thought. The other thought is to just take our 1970 standards and look at them again, update them, lower the standards to what makes sense more now, across the board. So every category probably can be lowered to a certain degree, and still, because most of those standards in the 70s were based on suburban 1950s, everybody drives a car sort of mentality. And then the third one is to sort of look at it more critically. You could say, eliminate parking standards altogether. And if that sounds like a radical idea, 5 years ago, probably it was. But if you look around the country, hundreds of communities now have eliminated their mandatory parking requirements altogether. And they just work with developers to come up with what makes sense based on their parking studies and their needs. So Hudson in New York, Hartford, Buffalo, Boston, Bridgeport, Burlington are some of the examples here in the Northeast of significant-sized cities who have eliminated all parking standards from their code, minimum parking standards from their code. Kingston just adopted a new zoning code. Took them 3 years rewriting almost everything in the city. They eliminated parking standards in their code, minimum parking standards.
Has there been any follow-up studies after
Yeah, I was
they
curious.
eliminated?
They have. You know, a lot of them haven't been in place for a long period of time, but I know in Buffalo they did and they found that they haven't had any major problems. That the reduction of parking is something, and I don't have the number in my head offhand, but I think it's something like, has gone down like 30-some%. But people aren't complaining that there's a huge crunch in parking. You could also do it only in the business district where there is public parking available. So you wouldn't do it in the residential. Maybe you lower the standards for a single-family house or a multifamily dwelling, but you eliminate it in the main district where there is surplus parking and public parking available and side street parking and that sort of thing. Syracuse, Schenectady, Ithaca, Rochester, Scranton, and Brattleboro have all done that in their major central districts. There's a site out there, I can't remember the name of it, but it tracks all these things. And it's every week you hear about a new community either doing it or thinking about it. So that's been put on the table as a possibility for Beacon. Maybe the other two are, you sort of step into it, you eliminate it for affordable housing, you lower the parking standards, maybe eliminate it in certain areas of Main Street, or you give the planning board more ability to waive it in Main Street situations, and then you go from there. But those are all the things that are sort of talked about generally, but not, there's no,
No traction.
well, there's disagreement.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's cautionary tales out there amongst people who have looked at it in the council and other people. So it's not on the verge of anything happening, but I thought it would be an interesting topic. You look at our agenda tonight, and parking is a big part of it. You know, the one on Fishkill Avenue is twice as much parking as building.
Yeah. I find it useful that you preface the start with an understanding of what's available, at least city parking, right?
Yeah.
So there's some context there to the start of a conversation about what, at least in my experience as a part of the board, is the biggest challenge, and that is how the laws are currently written in contrast to what it feels the reality is in terms of the fact that we tend to always end up finding parking after waiving, land banking, struggling, basically,
Right.
with the question of parking on just about every single application. So from at least my perspective, and I'd be curious what the rest of the board thinks, just that practical piece alone, I think warrants a look at our codes relative to modern parking, modern understanding of parking needs and how households operate, how, parking works nowadays as opposed to how the codes were written in the 70s dictate that we apply it now. So I see that as probably the sort of the starting point to conversation, right? I can understand people getting a little concerned about eliminating parking requirements altogether and wanting to sort of ease into the subject. But just from a practical standpoint, from what we do here on the planning board, I think we simply need to look at how the codes are written, how they're applied against the reality, because it's always a constant challenge and it's a struggle, and it takes a lot of time out of our planning board meetings.
Yes, that, just to be clear, the Central Main Street District and the Linkage District and the Waterfront Development District have had their parking standards looked at and lowered
Yeah.
in the last few years, but the rest of the city,
Yep.
the main residential district, the Fishkill Creek development, the general business district still has the 1970s versions, and you run into that problems there in
Right.
particular. But even Main Street you do.
Yeah. All those lots that you showed in gray, that's all city-owned property?
What's that?
All the lots that you showed
Yes.
in gray, those are all,
Well, the county owns one, so.
the county owns
Yeah.
the county center? Yeah.
Right, So
So
they're
they're-
all publicly owned,
yeah.
but not, most of the other ones are, all the other ones are city lots.
Yeah. So again, I see it as basically two parts to the same kind of puzzle. One is just that, available parking, underutilized available parking. To some degree, you mentioned paid parking. I don't know if it's seen as a deterrent or a management device, rather a revenue generating maintenance supporting device, paid parking.
If the way that paid parking works these days, they usually have computer generated and variable times. So you chart out when the most peak periods are and you charge more during those periods.
Sure.
So it actually, it does affect demand.
Huh?
People park a block or two away rather than, in the higher price spaces. You can make a differential between the parking spaces that are off-street and the one that are on Main Street, for instance.
So that type of mechanism has been proven to aid in shifting and balancing
Right.
a parking
And
distribution,
again,
if you will.
The money that's made is used for, number one, enforcement, and number two, maintenance of all the parking and street requirements
Yeah.
for parking, which is enormous, the amount of money the
Sure.
city spends on parking every year, and it's not accounted for by anybody except general taxation.
So could we, if we did that, could we afford new seats for the planning board members?
No, but you might afford more street trees along Main Street and better paved parking lots and,
Yeah, definitely advantages.
yes.
Are there strategies to, give residents like parking, residents can park on these streets overnight?
Yes.
Or whatever the strategy is where you privilege the residents over, the visitors?
Yes, you can do a variety of things that, you can have resident deductions in the parking in the parking metering system. You can have residential permits on side streets, for instance, where,
And is
people
that
park
something
every
that
day.
Beacon as a city can do, or is there anything like where the state has input on parking?
Yes, the state has input. I don't know if our legal person is up on this one, but I know in certain cities, and I don't know about city law, but in village law, you actually have to have an approval from the state government to do residential parking permits.
Is that difficult to come by?
No, it's just a member item, and usually goes, that's my understanding. I'm not sure about that one, so don't quote me on that. But I do think that it's not entirely a local decision, especially if the state has financed certain street maintenance issues and things like that. Certainly on state highways, you would have to get state permission.
So John, if the city were to develop the impetus to do something, right? At least from my perspective, I'll go back to this sort of practical aspect of the codes and how they're written and how they tend to challenge our applications, right? Would the council need to charge you with that and hire you for that part of a study?
Yes, they'd have to hire somebody to sort of comprehensively look at it and come up with a good reasoned argument, and they would have to, if you say go to paid parking, you would get the, I know they looked at paid parking at the city council level 10 years ago or
Yeah.
some time ago, I can't remember, it was before my time. And, they had quotes for companies and estimates of how much revenue would come and how much it would cost up front, and what the payback period would
Yeah.
be and all that sort of thing. The same for if you're going to do parking structures or, it's not hard to revise your code. I mean,
Yeah.
it is hard. It's always hard to change law, but it's not millions of dollars.
Yeah.
So more than likely, the easiest thing would be to update the 70 standards to something
Yeah.
uniformly across the city that was updated.
Yeah.
And probably lower in requirements. I think the elimination of affordable parking requirements would be a good first step.
Yeah.
Because that's what everybody's complaining about is the lack of affordable housing. Well, if the developer is willing to do below market rates, they should get a benefit from that.
Yeah. Yeah, so the reason I ask is I'm just curious, because this is, I think, an important conversation. And it obviously would take, the council to sort of generate some energy around this, to ask a consultant, you more than likely, to start to look at whatever aspects they think are appropriate
Right.
of what we just talked about, because you covered quite a gamut. I don't know how we end up getting there, but certainly worth having conversations with council members and
Right.
the mayor to see where they land on it and whether they want to take it up. So, but yeah, I think it's definitely an important, again, I continue to go back to how we, just about every month,
Yes.
struggle in the discussion about the requirements for parking. And I don't know, I personally would like to see the council start there. And then, move on to other bigger
There's
topics.
a lot of lots on Main Street that absolutely cannot provide parking.
Yeah,
They just can't. Because they're so small that if you put a building on it, I mean, first of all, if you put a parking lot in it, you get like 8 spaces. And then there would be no building there, so you would just.
we
So
come up
there
against,
has to be exceptions and parking requirements that acknowledge that a lot of, at least the Main Street lots, don't have any room for parking, and
Yep.
they have to have street parking or public parking
Yep.
as a backup. And if you want those lots filled in, you don't want empty lots fronting Main Street or one-story buildings facing Main Street, that you have to have parking exceptions.
yeah,
The board has often exempted commercial space from the parking requirement. The code allows us to do that on the central Main Street district, and just required residential parking.
yeah,
So that would be another thing. You remove minimum parking standards for commercial space, at least up to a certain degree, or if they don't have room for parking.
So when you made reference to communities removing minimum parking standards, there's almost certainly more than one approach, but are we talking about just eliminating hard and fast written requirements that are written along the lines of, say, 2 parking spots per single family unit, or, our formula for multifamily dwellings?
Right.
Or is there still some underlying or residual requirement to address parking on a more fact-specific?
I think it depends on the community. Some just eliminate it and assume that certainly in certain districts, the developer will provide parking because otherwise they won't be able to get a bank loan or they won't be able to rent their spaces. And so they end up doing it anyway, but they do it to what they think is appropriate for their land. Other places, I've heard that Buffalo does it by negotiation, essentially. They do a parking study, they determine what is appropriate, and through a seeker process, I assume, they determine that this is the right amount of parking for that space by use and area and surrounding viability of off-strike parking, and they come up with a solution for each space. But I think there's a lot of them that just say, we're going to leave it up to the developers, and they'll provide sufficient parking, and we provide backup parking based on their certain circumstances.
Well, it would seem like there's got to be some interplay with or consideration of what's also going on with street parking, because to give, one example, if someone's putting in a building and there's no street parking available,
Right.
You've got a narrow street, it's a standing zone, you've got a situation where the private incentive there's going to be a private incentive structure there to provide enough parking
Yes.
that it's not an issue for building residents, whereas if you're on a street that has available public parking, that may in effect be simply increasing public cost or shifting private cost to public cost, it would be interesting to see more specific proposals.
Yes.
Yeah.
I guess
I haven't
wanted it.
I've only dug into it a little bit.
Karen, to your question, the city of Beacon would need home rule legislation from the state of New York in order to get a residential parking pass permit system.
Is that kind of like a matter of course thing, like we ask our representative, or?
Yeah, it would be through the whole home rule legislation process, so you need to ask your local representative, they have to introduce it, we have to provide them with a draft bill, and so there's a little bit of a process to it, but in order to, we would need to do more research to find out the entire process, but.
I know that Ossining has it. In Ossining, you have permits to park streets,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah, it looks like there's several communities across the state that have it. It would just, we need to look into the specific process.
Well, we got to move on, but
Yes.
thank you, John. And, yeah, I think, David, you make a good point. That's sort of what I was getting to is, how do we get to the point of even the city council considering entering into studies just exactly like what you talk about?
Can I make a
Yeah, please.
As things stand, we've got parking requirements in place where a substantial part of, or a substantial portion of the properties in the city are not in compliance with them.
Right,
It seems like it would be a good idea to address that.
totally. Yeah, agreed.
And the one thing I'd encourage is not to base long-term decisions like this on anecdotal things, but to study it, analyze it with the specific lots and buildings and demand that we
Yep.
have in this building and the development potential. Because what I'm afraid of is it will be giving away things that are public and not ever being able to reclaim them.
Okay. Well, welcome everybody to the August 2023 meeting of the City of Beacon Planning Board. First item of business being any modifications to last month's meeting notes. Otherwise, I'll accept a motion to enter them into the record. Motion by Kevin?
Second.
Second by David. All in favor? Aye. So then we'll go to our first item on the agenda, which is public hearing on an application for site plan approval and subdivision, mixed-use commercial and residential, 152, 158 Fishkill Avenue. Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the Planning Board. For the record, Taylor Palmer with the law firm of Cuddy and Fader on behalf of the applicant. Tonight, I'm joined by our project architect, Jacqueline Tyler of Nexus Creative, together with our traffic consultant, Rich DeAndrea of Colliers Engineering, and Mike Morganti of Arden Consulting. As this is a public hearing, Mr. Chairman, if I may, I'll give the public a quick background, maybe to save Christian the benefit of laying out the process.
First, let us open the public hearing.
Absolutely.
So I'll accept a motion to do just that. Motion to open the public hearing for this application.
Motion.
Motion by Karen,
Second?
second by Kevin. All in favor? Aye.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. By way of brief procedural background, the applicant is seeking a site plan and subdivision, which in this case is a lot merger approval. And they're proposing a mixed-use development at 152 to 158 Fishkill Avenue. For those in the public, you might know this as the Blue Multifamily House and then Double D's Auto along Fishkill Avenue across from the Valero gas station. Before I do turn it over to Jacqueline, who's just put the site plan up on the plans, for the benefit of the public, we are dealing with two lots existing today, and the applicant is proposing to consolidate those down into one resultant lot. The property is presently classified in the city's T or transitional zoning district, and the property is not in the city's historic district landmark overlay district. The property is, again, located across from the Valero gas station, and surrounding area includes the high-density multifamily at 31 Hamilton Fish Plaza, which has 70-plus units, and then townhome and residential developments, as well as the gas station and other mixed use in the area. Jacqueline will go into this in a little more detail in just a minute with the benefit of the renderings, but for the benefit of the public and the board at the high level, the new building program is, again, a mixed-use building with office space on the first floor and then 16 residential units on the upper floors, which, again, are both permitted as of right uses in the T district. Two of those apartments will be below market rate units in accordance with the city's below market rate or affordable workforce housing law. There will be a rooftop terrace provided for residents of the development. As mentioned earlier presentation about parking, the property is very heavily parked and provides the parking for the components on the site. Importantly, recognizing the transition between Main Street and the surrounding mixed-use communities, we were designed in furtherance of those different sort of balances in the surrounding neighborhood. So as a result, the structure will front along Fishkill Avenue and neighbor commercial uses, and then the parking will be located behind the building and the rear. The application has been before your board for several months, and we have been working to address your comments. The building height indeed was reduced to a zoning compliant building height throughout that process, and there were other enhancements to the parking area and others that have worked on throughout. We've also worked to incorporate landscaping planning by Deborah Adamson's into the design. Last week, as the board is aware, for the benefit of the public, the board adopted a seeker negative declaration confirming that the project will not have any potentially significant adverse impacts. We have also been before your subcommittee, the ARB subcommittee, twice, and they provided recommendations that were posted online. Additionally, the Zoning Board of Appeals held its meeting at a public hearing last month, and at that meeting they adopted they approved a variance for the specifically for retaining wall height for certain sections of the retaining wall in the parking area. So with that, I'll ask Jacqueline to briefly walk through the site plan for the benefit of the public, and of course we're here with any questions the board might have.
Hi, good evening. My name is Jacqueline Tyler with Nexus Creative. I'm going to actually focus on some of the changes that were requested by the planning board at the last few meetings and speak on the architecture, and then Mike will be speaking specifically about the site plan components to you this evening. So as Taylor mentioned, we've been in front of the board for a couple of months now. I know at the last board meeting, one of the topics that was brought up specifically was requesting a landscape buffer area at the north side of the lot. Can you see my? Okay, I know at the ZBA it wasn't showing. So we did implement that, which actually reduced this aisle width to 24 feet. I believe that's one of the concerns as well with the planning comments that have come back. That will be updated on the civil drawings, but it has been updated here on the architectural site plan. We also incorporated a triangular island at this area. I think that's an area as discussion at the last meeting as well. That does reduce the aisle width here to 24 feet and provides some additional buffer and landscaping in the center of the parking area. I'm going to now turn the attention over to the architecture itself. So this looks much different than you all saw the last few times we've been in front of you. I'm going to take us through a couple of the subcommittee meetings and the comments and how we addressed each of them. So at the April subcommittee meeting, we received the comments that they would like us to look at the roof refinements. Previously, they felt that the main roof volume was too linear, and they wanted us to introduce forms to break that linear component up. They also asked us to look at the entry and a way to incorporate brick at the entry, as well as define it more as an entry signature. We were also asked to explore the materials. There was a palette of 3 different material types. You all saw that as well before, and we were asked to address that. We went in front of the subcommittee in July with a version of this. We've since made refinements that were addressed at the meeting itself. Those included, and I'll take you through a full scope of this after addressing each of them. They did ask us to look at the transition from the ground floor to the second floor. They felt that they wanted it to either be a little bit more distinct or blend, one of the two. So I'll walk through that in a minute. They asked us to review what has been referred to as parapet conditions on the the bulk ends. So those at the last meeting, they felt that they weren't necessarily contributing to the architecture, or they wanted them to look at how to incorporate those in a vocabulary that would be more consistent with their original use, and I'll walk you through that as well. They also asked us to study, I did the transition, they also asked us to review the glazing patterns between the first floor and the second floor. So in order to address some of these, what I'd like to, and as another comment was to make sure we were showing the rear elevation, which we do have on here, as well as a perspective view. which I'm actually going to take us to the perspective view, simply because that's the way you're going to view the building. You typically will not be viewing the building with a straight-on elevation, so some of those relationships between the first and the second floor will be hard to realize unless you were standing across the street in front of the building. But we feel we've addressed many of the comments with that the board had over the last 2 meetings. In addressing the parapet condition, and I am going to flip back to this, we did look at refining that. We felt it was important because in our mind there are 2 different volumes, which you can see on the left-hand side. Those define that volume on the left. The right-hand side is lower, so we've contained that within the bulkhead areas there, the parapets. And then we have addressed the glazing and the vertical. So we introduced a new window pattern. You can see the vertical connection between the first and the upper floors. The dormer areas themselves have their own signature and their own vocabulary. We did extend the roof eaves on those to define those a little bit more. That was one of the specific requests at the meeting. So we extended the overhang there. It actually helps with some of the solar, the sun shading as well. We also looked at incorporating the same material color up on the pergola, up on the roof deck. That was a specific request from the board itself. And then as I mentioned, we do include the rear elevation here at the bottom. That will be the view, that's the parking lot, and then I'll show you the actual view. That would be the view from the adjacent neighboring area. And we did include a view of the rooftop terrace. It's something that is important to the owner, important to make sure that we're giving the amenity space to those, to the residents within the building. And back to the front, as I mentioned, we did incorporate the brick entry and giving that entry more of a signature item. One of the items that was important throughout the beginning of this process was incorporating the accessible ramp, which is included behind this landscaping. So you're able to enter here at the corner and travel up to the entry along here. So if somebody is along Main Street, they are able to access the building from the front along Fishkill Avenue. On the right-hand side, these were the renderings that were indicated at the last meeting. We would update those, so you can see that they have been updated. You can see the material that is included, and those are the retaining wall heights that were approved at the zoning meeting. Can I turn it over to Mike for site plan, and then we'll come back, or is there something you want to address currently?
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead. We'll come back.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Michael Morgante. I am the project engineer for this application. It's before the board. So since the last time we were here, what we had done was essentially tried to put together a stormwater management plan for the project. That was our big push for this last submittal. We were able to, at the end of the month of June, I believe, go out with Mr. Russo. He witnessed the soil testing associated with the proposed stormwater management system. Everything seemed to be adequate in terms of the type of material that's there for infiltration of the system and for overall stormwater management on the site. We prepared a stormwater management report for the city's review, which again, Mr. Russo did review. There were some ministerial comments that he had, a lot of dot your I, cross your T kind of stuff, but in general, the stormwater management plan seems to be acceptable and will be suitable for the design of this project. There are still some small items that we need to address. Again, dotting your I's, crossing your T's kind of stuff in terms of maybe reducing the width of the entrance still, which we'll continue to work with the city on that aspect. We need to do some soil test pits along the property line to confirm depth of rock, and things of that nature, none of which I don't believe will impact the overall design of the site plan in itself, other than if we reduce the driveway aisle width, we may be able to add more landscaping and enhance the plan even further as shown right now. The stormwater management system is actually located behind the building, beneath the parking lot. There'll be catch basins that are located within that parking area that'll capture the stormwater runoff, send it to this subsurface drainage system. It'll recharge a lot of the stormwater runoff into the ground. The soils on the site are a very sandy type loam. And then any overflow storm events for like a 10-year or 100-year storm will go to an outlet control structure, which will release the stormwater from the site into the city's drainage system at rates that equal the pre-development conditions for the site. So that's a general summary of how the stormwater management system will work. We prepared a lighting plan, a corresponding landscape plan. I think the plans have been developed in advance pretty well at this point. Again, there's some minor items that we need to address from both the planner's comments and the city planning board engineer's comments, which we will work to address for the end of this month's submittal for September.
So at this point, let's talk with our planner and engineer about any of the open items. Anything rise to the level, John and John, that you'd like us to consider at the moment? John?
The submittal this month is primarily architectural.
Yep.
So we have some engineering type questions and lands. The one thing that I keep asking for and not getting is that the aisle width over here by the terraced retaining wall is like 35, 40 feet across. And it seems like you could put another layer of landscaping in front of that terraced wall effect, not inhibit the driveway in any way or the truck movements, and get a good chunk of additional landscaping. So I'll lay out that. I think the throat of the driveway is too wide.
Yep.
But they did address all, if not, most of the comments in terms of the architectural review subcommittee on architecture. And so I think primarily tonight we would like to hear from the public and also hear from the boards about the architecture, because that's what's sort of been on the table as new information this month.
Yep, great. I'm curious, as far as the applicant's processing of John's comment about the throat and the additional landscaping, what are your thoughts?
Oh, yeah, no, we have no issue with reducing the aisle width even further. I thought I had mentioned that during my presentation. And as we reduce that aisle width, we'll take advantage of any additional area to the right of the entrance that's available. We'll add more landscaping there as well. These are good suggestions, and we'll be glad to do them.
Great. I'm assuming the board agrees with John's recommendation.
Let me just note, that some of the dot your i's, cross your t's stuff, I couldn't get to it because I went away on vacation. So the push of what my submittal
really no
was.
excuse.
The push of what my submittal was really mostly the stormwater. We'll take care of those items.
Understood. Yeah, as long as we have the understanding that in response to John's comments and the board's recommendation.
Absolutely. Yes,
you're
absolutely
gonna-
understood.
okay.
Thank you.
Great, thanks. Mr. Russo.
So as Mr. Morganti pointed out, they did work on the stormwater. We did review the report. The soils are acceptable to what they're proposing out there. As he noted, he went on vacation, so engineering was not addressed at this
Yeah.
time, so all our previous comments are still outstanding.
Yeah, yeah. So no objections or challenges with any of those outstanding items, okay. As far as the architecture, my assumption is that what we're seeing on the latest submission is in response to the full ARB report and the work that you did together with the ARB.
Correct.
So that's great. I just, a few questions on the final architecture as you're describing it here. So just a quick observation. So materiality, and it has evolved quite a bit and to the positive since we first saw this, so thank you. Materiality, great. I think in terms of the materials that you've evolved to now are much more in context, a much better representation of, how I think this area can look in this building. Form-wise, it has evolved, I think, better as well. I'm just really curious about the resolution of the two sort of truncated gable ends, especially as they interplay with the shed dormers. I kind of look at the, I guess what I would call the north elevation, this one here. Yeah, lower. And I'm ever curious as to why It just looks like a cut-off,
Yep.
gable.
So this was addressed from a number of different vocabularies that we studied within Beacon. So we were looking at the surrounding architecture, and this did seem to be a vocabulary that exists within the community. There are a number of mansard roofs, which we did not think were appropriate in this scenario. And in regards to this comes back to our building height as well, with
Yep.
our mean height between our eave and our highest point, which let me jump over to this section here. I'll enlarge this for you.
Yeah. I think the most challenging aspect to me when I look at it, and I've sort of highlighted it right here, I don't know if you can recognize this from your,
Yes.
yeah,
Yep.
is what I mentioned before, where this sort of awkwardness of this shed dormer as it sort of meets the truncated gable end. It just feels extremely awkward.
Okay.
So my question is, if there's a rationale for it, I'm curious to hear it, but if there is also, a consideration for how to better resolve those two,
Yep.
because they're not prominent, right? Because especially this elevation, you're going to see coming down 52 as you come into
Correct.
Beacon. Pretty,
Correct. Yep.
you're going to see it a lot.
So, so the rationale as part of it is staying within our building height. So you can see the top roof at the pergola is our
Yep.
maximum height.
Yep.
So we could extend this further, but it still would be a truncated, it wouldn't achieve a full gable end, a peak, I should say.
Yeah, no, I understand.
But again, I think that there's a number of vocabulary scenarios that don't have a peaked gable. So from the front, to your point, we think it's successful. From the front, there's no concerns there, I'm hearing. It's more along the edge. Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, again, you see it here. This is now the south elevation.
Yes,
right?
there's actually, if we drive right up here, there is that vocabulary in a number. So
Well,
I
if
think
the vocabulary exists, does it mean it's still good?
not always. Again, we thought it was successful.
It just-
I think the board felt that side you're pointing to now
Yeah.
was more. I think the words were that it was more successful on the
Well,
north
if you
south
look-
side.
My feeling.
Yeah, the south
My
side.
feeling is if you look at the south side straight on, the whole idea of truncating this gable is even more,
South.
it's more prominent, right? Maybe a little bit more successful in that some of the business happening at the trellis up top kind of draws your eye away from it.
This view, you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to echo what I said earlier, the fact that we're looking at this, but nobody's going to see this view.
I don't believe that. don't believe
We'll show you. Right, that's in the alley that no longer exists. There is no alleyway. It's been
I know
removed.
where it is.
But we're happy to show you images of that, because we have done some studies on what the views would be along there.
We've been told before, especially with renderings and people swearing up and down, that rendering is
Yep.
an accurate reflection of your eye height and what you're going to see in reality. It never turns out that way. So
I can't vouch for others. I can.
Anyway, what I'm
You'd like us to look at that and address that.
What I'm highlighting here is just a really awkward meeting of geometries and angles that when you're starting with a brand-new building, just from my sensibilities personally, and, again, being an architect myself and a designer myself, doesn't mean I'm right.
Understood.
But just from my 30-some-odd years of
Yep.
experience doing this, just doesn't, it's really
Okay, we'll look at that.
You're right.
awkward. Very awkward.
We'll look at that.
Again, especially when you're starting with a brand-new blank slate, right? So, thank you.
Yep.
It's
So,
also hiding the mechanicals, right? There's mechanicals.
Correct, there are
in
mechanicals up there.
In between the two roof lines.
sure.
And I was wondering if you could do a clip gable as opposed to a, false.
Yeah, yeah. I guess the way I'm looking at it is that as a blank slate, this is one of myriad ways to study and resolve the geometries in a more natural, elegant way.
We hear your comment, and we will look at it.
Yeah, and that's another one. Yeah. Thanks.
I mean, I feel that we have been addressing all of the comments, and we will continue to do that.
I feel like I'm happy with the way that you, the street-facing facade, I'm happy with the way we resolved that. I think that there were a number of things that were idiosyncratic and not aligned and sort of odd-looking. And one of the things about that John's picked up on is around the corner now, that's not resolved in the same way.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I agree with you, Kevin. I think, again, the building has evolved very well toward, and yeah, I'm all for some idiosyncrasies that have balance. They speak to proportion. They basically resonate and they feel right. The scale of things, the way you've broken up the very long facade to feel much more sort of scalable. More about a human scale. All very positive. And again, materiality, I think, has evolved very, very nicely. It's just those two ends that just don't sit well.
Okay.
And I really think there's ways to solve that without going through changing your program or the
No.
massing or anything,
Yeah, it's a geometry exercise study. Yeah. So thank you for considering looking at that. Anything else, board, on the architecture?
I want to thank you for clearly a lot of work that you've put into it. It's come a long way. I agree. I really like the material palette, and I would agree with the looking further at the north and south elevations.
Yeah, and I think knowing Deborah's work with the landscaping planning that you're sharing with us here, how it will evolve and mature, I think will really start to help to soften not just the frontage, but the impact of the wall, right? You do have your variance, but your landscaping will also help to minimize the impact and the feel and the effect of that.
Yeah, and we actually did show a picture. I don't think I have it with me tonight. I can look. But we did show a picture at the ARB meeting of how this wall will eventually look like a growth wall, as opposed to what it's viewed in the renderings. We didn't want to portray it that way because it's not going to be that way from the beginning. But shortly after, it will be it will look like a planted wall.
What are the plantings on the wall? Is it ivy or? I'm sorry.
That's okay. That's
think so.
Deborah's forte,
Yeah,
but she's not here this evening.
On the wall, there was Virginia creeper for
Okay.
one. She
And I
typically
just-
uses native.
She sold
China
natives,
colors.
yeah.
All the species are listed on the landscaping plan.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, and I want to agree with John. Is it John? John?
There's three of us
About-
here, so all you need to do is say, I agree with John, and you're
Because I
good.
have this thing about, there's never enough green space and all the, I haven't been here this long, I understand that, but for all the plans that I'm seeing come before me, it's all about how many apartments they can cram into the lot. And there's nowhere for these people to go. Okay, you have the pergola up on the roof, and that's to be commended, but what if you don't want to go up there? And we keep talking about it being such a walkable city, but it's not really inviting. There are no benches. There are I can count on one hand the amount of benches that you see along Main Street. The trees are half dead. And, but don't let me go on. But I think, increasing that area, because it's, it's just inviting. You need to put more into that, so that there's something else for people to look forward to,
Understood. Thank you.
I think.
Great. Anything else, board, before we go to the public? Okay. Is there anyone here from the public who would like to add their comments to the record on this application?
Hi, everyone. My name is Melissa Burkett. I live at 163 Fishkill Avenue, which is directly across from this development. So yes, there is the Valero, and yes, there is the Hamilton Fish, but there are 2 single-family homes in between those 2 properties. I've lived there for 8.5 years. I live there with my 7.5-year-old son, a dog, and a cat. And I've printed out just some images because I was really confused when I received the proposal. It didn't look like an accurate representation of what is there across the hill right now. So I just thought maybe for like clarification purposes, I would print these images out if it's okay if I approach. Yeah.
You're the purple Victorian?
No, I'm the yellow.
Oh, the one next to it. Yeah.
Thanks.
That was the other question. I see that how the parking is now, and they're not going through that really narrow spot, that they're going to come into the unit through Fishkill Avenue.
So this image right here is
How you entered
the front of my house. I took this while standing on my front porch. And as you can see, there's a lot of green space there. It's one of the only pockets close to Main Street that exists like this, unless you're looking at like Madam Brett or down by the creek. A lot of people walk by my street. It is a main artery into town. Folks from the assisted living center come. Families walk by my home as they go to Memorial. The list goes on. You know, people going to the Beacon High School for art events, people going to my neighbors for art events. I think it's important to provide green space for the folks in Beacon that live here because it's dwindling. It's dwindling everywhere. I also just printed this out because I'm really confused where this retaining wall is going in. I printed out the comparison from the rendering because I just can't place it, right? So you have on the green image, which is what it looks like right now, the green one. You have the old stone wall, right? And then the white retaining wall, which to my understanding is the beginning of the property where Double D's is. Am I correct? I would like to know where the property boundary goes.
If you have questions, let's hear them.
Yeah, that's my question.
We'll take them down, and then we'll ask the applicant if they'd like to answer those questions in order once you're done.
I guess I want to know where exactly this retaining wall, as it sits in the rendering, is going to begin. Because I couldn't place it. Also, it just looks like a barren, dead hill, and it's obviously not. So that's my question, is where exactly does it start? If it does start, indeed, right across from my home, I mean, there's a lot of light pollution, there's a lot of noise pollution. I'm really worried about headlights coming straight into my house, you know, throughout the night. I'm also really worried about that entrance to that parking lot existing that close to Main Street. That corner on Main Street sees a lot of nightlife. There are several bars, several late night establishments. We all know that it can be really active late into the evening. Just a couple of months ago, I had a fist fight on my front porch at 4 o'clock in the morning. I would really like to avoid further loitering and illegal activity happening in parking lots and alleys, and that extending up Fishkill Avenue right across from my family home. So I'm not necessarily opposed to this development. I just really want clarity on where the retaining wall begins, and also perhaps to make the suggestion, which I think is kind of a reasonable request, to maybe move the entrance to the driveway to the other side, closer to Main Street, so it's not facing into my house and my neighbor's house. That's it.
Thank you.
Yep.
Just for reference and picking up on it's Melissa's question, would it be possible to reference where that drive is in relationship to the properties across the street?
We can certainly put in a supplemental submittal where we show the visual reference where the existing driveway, for example, is into the blue home or blue multifamily, and then, of course, the extended driveway of Double D's, which extends to the property line, and certainly make reference to where that retaining wall is.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful.
Of course, we're trying to also keep traffic away from the intersection with Main Street, among others, and utilizing existing locations, so those are all important aspects. We certainly hear those comments and can certainly try to further address them. And I think maybe John's comment with narrowing the driveway, among others, will help further soften, some of those impacts, but we can certainly make further reference to that in the supplemental.
Yeah, so for example, just sort of kind of using this as an example, if, as it looks like they are, these are placed relative to one another, top and bottom, the edge of the new building roughly aligns, maybe it's got another 10 feet north of where the existing gas station ends on the north side, right? Auto body, sorry. It's the diff.
Right.
Right, so that's just, I'm just sort of, and then from there, you have a buffer of landscaping, and then the.
Right, we're not taking any of the Hebrew Alliance's
driveway's
property
correct.
trees down. I mean, all of that green space that's going to remain.
Right.
It's only that which is on our property. There is some, cutting into that hill to make the retaining wall, but much of that will remain as is, but we can certainly reference, of course, where the retaining wall will begin and how it will extend into the site.
Yeah, thank you. So then, as it is now, in front of the auto body, that entire thing is a curb cut,
Correct.
right? So is it safe to say that where on the north end of the auto body's curb cut stops is basically where your curb cut stops?
Approximately, yes.
Roughly.
Roughly.
Right? So that's just for kind of reference.
Yeah, we'll overlay it onto the aerial
Yeah.
so that it's
Okay,
crystal
yeah,
clear.
that would be helpful if you could,
Yep.
just for our
Sure.
information.
And if there is a mechanism to, we'll pro-offer it sort of as if there is means for adding additional landscaping across the street on the individual's property, I think we could be amenable to something to that effect, if that would further mitigate any potential concerns with respect
If
to.
you neck down the throat of this also, and maybe neck in the
Right.
left side a little bit, you'll
Yeah.
be able to throw more
Yep.
landscaping up there,
Yeah.
blocking lights. and
Agreed.
Shifting that.
And we
Yeah.
talked, if there's land bank spaces, they should go in the frontage there, so you get more green space on that, in that curb cut area.
Right, and I think John has referenced this before, including in the master plan. I mean, there are now on-street parking spaces that the city has proposed in that location. We're implementing effectively because we're closing one of the existing curb cuts.
Yep, no, I understand.
For the Blue House.
You can see the location of the telephone pole that's in this picture on that drawing. So you can sort of locate it by that.
Right. But we'll overlay it so there's no ambiguities.
Yep, thank you. Yeah, and I think John Russo made a good point, to bias
Right.
as you reduce away from the northern side,
Mhm.
right?
Right, and then put a little denser
Yeah.
landscaping up front,
Yep.
help blocking some of the lighting coming out of that.
Yep.
You're good.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else from the public who'd like to share their comments? Yes, please.
Hi, I'm excited to speak tonight, and I'll be brief. My name's Maureen Brierton. I live at 77 Duchess. And my only thought is with all the recent rain, and I heard you talk about water, and I am not fully versed, but with all the recent rain and impact of the water, it strikes me that in addition to the landscape that they have and that footprint, there's a lot of parking, so that's going to be a lot of water. And perhaps there needs to be more plant life in front of the building to absorb those occasional storms that we now have that are getting more common. So I would just ask the architects and engineers who are designed this, as the water is now coming down more, that they have a good way for the water to get off that large parking lot, not flood the streets, because even though they have the storm drains, sometimes landscaping can very much help.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Anyone else? Please.
Hi, my name is Jessica Jelliff. I live at 194 Fishkill, up the road. Hello. I have 2 points to make. One was in reference to Melissa's point about the driveway. I was on vacation also, so I'm playing a bit of catch up. One question that I had was about the location of the driveway and why it was considered better to move it away from the intersection when in fact there's the alley, that alley driveway right there. There's the driveway across the street for not only the Salvation Army, but also the back of, was that Kitchen and Coffee now? That driveway, it seems in a way almost more sensible to have all the driveways in the same place together. Then it would also help the residences across the street from the driveway. So just a bit of 2 cents. The other question that I had, and again, I'm playing catch up, the parcel access says, or sorry, not parcel access, but the, somewhere in the plans it says that the blue house was built in 1940. Is that based on the infamous records fire? Is that true to the best of your knowledge, John? No. So we live in an old house, as you know, old, and we figured that, you know, it says it was built in 1920, but it's actually somewhere between 1904 and 1910, based on all of the you know, maps, photographs that you can find online. But I guess I'm wondering about the historical value of that house. You guys have obviously already addressed this, but it seems a shame to me, and I know you guys have done a lot of work already, and I am not opposed to this. I'm all for more affordable housing in Beacon, but it seems a huge shame to me to decimate a building that is part of the flavor and character of our little city. We recently purchased another house up near Green Street Park that also has a mansard roof, so now I have a little soft spot for mansard roofs. Seems, again, a shame to decimate such a beauty as that, even though it may be a little in disrepair. Those are my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Sorry, Teresa.
Teresa Kraft. I'm still opposed to granting this site plan and subdivision approval. The purpose of subdivision control is to provide for future growth and development. In my view, this is a massive overbuild in our business district that will forever impact the chance to have any future locations for commercial buildings like the new DocuWare that offers employment opportunities to residents. If you listen to last night's council workshop, they discussed turning the car dealerships into more space for affordable housing. Eliminating all potential for future commercial space, we are becoming a full-blown bedroom community for many who already can't afford to live here while employment is scarce. The building design may have evolved, but this is still smack in front of residential homes with families. The applicant's representative just said, if acceptable, they can build a buffer green wall on the neighbor's property. How cruel to suggest to build a wall and crush them in. We the people should not be forced to change for their profit. This project is too big. This is history repeating itself when industries closed up shop and people were forced out of the community to work. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
In terms of the history of the house, it's much older than 1940. It was looked at by the council when they last did their looks at historic district designations in Main Street area, and they decided because of the multiple changes from the original structure that they weren't going to list it. So it was a council decision not to protect this building.
And also, I'd like to believe that it's an improvement, although maybe the applicant's husband who works there may not agree that removing double Ds might also be an improvement in that corridor, try and bring that more and transition from Main Street to the residential neighborhood.
Okay. Okay. Sorry, I'm just referencing my notes. And giving anyone else from the public an opportunity. some
And if I may,
time.
it is obviously, it's an office and residential mixed use. So there is a
Yep.
office right off of Main Street component for this, as added to T District.
Understood.
Yep.
We all know that.
All right.
Anyone else from the public?
If I may, Mr. Chairman, this was a first for me. A neighbor did contact me directly today, late before the meeting. I did want to note her name, Kimberly Garcia of 159 Fishkill Avenue. I'll give it to Mercedes, a copy of her email, but she did note she was concerned about Double D's and the auto body, that had been an auto body shop for as long as she remembers, and that these sites can have elevated levels of metals. To the effect of, I'll incorporate that. It was sent to me. I don't know if it was sent to the board. I thought it might have been, but
I don't think
I will
so.
provide that to Mercedes. But we have provided to the city, as requested at the beginning of the process, a phase 1 and 2 environmental assessments. So all of the testing of the site has been done, but it would have to be cleaned up in accordance with regulations notwithstanding. So all of that's been provided. So testing has been done of the site. But there was that letter from Kimberly Garcia, 159 Fishkill Ave.
Thank you for mentioning that. So you're going to enter that into the record?
Yeah, I'll send that
is what you're
to
saying?
Mercedes,
Yeah.
or I'll give her a physical copy.
You know, you've been saying Double D's, and I had no idea until I just looked at it. That's the name of this auto body shop. Cute. I'm assuming it's because it was run by David and Doug.
Yep.
And what was the results of the site testing?
I probably would spend about an hour going through it, but effectively that
There were some minor elevated things that need to be cleaned up, but
it has to be done per regs, so.
Right, so you have, for anything found, you're required to
Correct.
remediate
Yes,
to the satisfaction of then subsequent testing.
yes.
Which will be recorded.
One of our questions is, have soil samples been taken, and what has been there from the auto body shop for decades? And the answer is yes, and it has to be cleaned up.
It has to be remediated.
Right.
yeah, that was one of the concerns I had right off the bat and had requested
Yep.
an environmental study of it.
Great, thank you. Okay, so with that, I will, unless there's any objections, entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
Motion?
Motion by Kevin,
Second.
second by Karen. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And then I think with that, I think we can authorize our council's office to generate draft.
Great.
And then with that, is there anything else we can do for you tonight?
That's it, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. So I'll accept a motion to authorize Chris's office to generate draft resolution for our review and potential adoption next month. Motion by Karen,
Second.
second by Kevin. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Might also, just to answer some of the public questions, that the driveway is recommended to be farther away from that busy intersection because people back up for left
Yep.
turns there. And so people coming in and out wouldn't be able, so for transportation.
Traffic safety,
access,
yeah.
farther away from that intersection, the better. So it can't be on the south side. It wouldn't work.
Yep.
Wouldn't be approved by DOT.
Sightlines, safety, all that. Yes.
And the new on-street parking spaces.
But I think it can be narrowed and it can be landscaped so that it doesn't provide a blight directly across from this property at
Right.
the
Yeah.
very least.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that, John. That's helpful. Okay, we'll move on to our second agenda item, which is the continued review of an application for site plan amendment at 2 Cross Street, which is a 3-story mixed-use building submitted by Hudson Todd LLC. And again, this is an amendment to a previously approved site plan, specifically around our favorite topic, parking. And so welcome. It's our understanding that there is found a need for 5 additional spots since we last talked.
I guess
Let's talk about
I'll
that.
have Colliers address that specifically, but
All right, yep.
just basically since the last time we appeared before you last month, we addressed a number of the comments. We've added more intricate stormwater design, and of course we updated the traffic report and then incorporated that into the site plan. I guess, Rich, if you could, since that's the topic du jour here. Thank you.
Yeah, Rich D'Andrea, Colliers Engineering and Design. So as far as the parking goes, we didn't really change much in our analysis from the last meeting. The only thing that we specifically added to our letter was a specific request that we're looking for the board to modify the parking requirement for the commercial space to reduce the parking requirement down to the 25 spaces that we're providing on the parking lot. That, we went through the shared parking analysis in pretty good detail last meeting. I know there's some comments, and maybe I think it may be better actually to hear from your traffic consultant before we go further.
So I'm most curious about, because from what I understand from our last meeting where we had discussed, and I thought we had arrived at at least my memory is that we had arrived at a sort of a resolved, understanding on a certain number of waived spaces and an organization of parking that is satisfactory. And since then, based on some different math, I guess, just give us a little bit of history on this. And I mentioned 5 at the beginning. My understanding is that because of that different math, the resultant is a need for additional spaces over and above what we were talking about last month. So could you describe that?
So yeah, our shared parking analysis that we had done it 2 ways. We'd done it on the city code requirements, and at the city code requirements, we had identified a need for 29 total spaces.
Yep.
We had done it then also on the Institute of Transportation Engineers requirements for the assisted living category that we talked about, really the senior units that are in here and the affordable housing units, and we came out at 25 spaces. So that was supporting the 25 spaces that are proposed. I think the comment about the need for the additional 4 spaces comes from your traffic consultant's letter.
Right. So then just sticking with that.
Yeah.
The last time we were together, we were talking about a total need of 25.
Correct.
Right? So with that, yes, let's hear from. But
before we go there,
okay.
The one thing that I just wanted to mention was, I think what we had discussed towards the end of the last meeting was that we were going to, and this is what's in our letter, was provide 25 spaces on the site, designate 6 of them for the senior units specifically, and that the other 19 spaces on the site would be fully shared spaces.
Right.
And that as part of that, we're requesting that the board consider modifying the parking requirement for the commercial use.
Right.
To get down to that level of 25 spaces.
Right. So then these additional 4, based on the math.
Yeah.
Where do they fall? Right. So are you asking us to consider modifying the parking requirement to include those additional 4 waived, or can we talk about some other option? Right. So let's just first hear from.
I think you should hear from your traffic consultant.
Yes. So you have the mic.
Yes, I do. So the follow-up review on the materials, we found that the shared parking analysis, the ITE numbers that Colliers was using were based on the average rate for the 2 proposed uses, the assisted living and the affordable housing. Best practice is to use the 85th percentile rate for determining peak parking demand. Based on that rate, and also we found that there is a time of day specific, or a time of day specific demand table. So what they were using was for the time of day specific data for just multifamily housing. There is one specific to assisted living. So based on that and the 85th percentile rates for the affordable housing and the assisted living, we calculated the shared parking analysis to meet a demand of 29 spaces.
Right, okay.
Again, that's just best practices to use the 85th percentile rate. I mean, I think it's manageable to find land bank spaces if that's possible for the board to discuss. But that's how we arrived at that number.
Yeah, okay. So, thank you. Appreciate that. So then, as far as, do you dispute what?
I mean,
any
I understand the use of the 85th percentile, but I will say that right out of the IT book, it specifically says that in reference to 85th percentile rates, this number is not intended to recommend a policy about the level of parking that should be supplied. It's provided solely as a qualitative reference for the analyst. So it's something to consider, but it's not necessarily for policy. The average rate that we're talking about is an average peak demand. It's not just an average rate, it's the average of the peak demand for that use. So I understand there's some differences here. If we look at it based on the city code and we use the analysis that we did previously, we're still at the same 29 spaces, so I understand that.
Oh, okay.
Based on the city code, we were at 29 spaces. So I think, we can talk about land banking some spaces. I think there's an opportunity to do that, to get to a 29, and if that's something that we want to talk about, we can do that.
Yes, we do.
Okay.
So just to, go ahead, do you have a question?
Yeah, just very quick for start. With the subsequent analysis on the 29 spaces, is that taking account of keeping the 6 spaces reserved in connection with the senior housing or not? Because that's the question.
That analysis does not assume any reserved spaces. That analysis just says that the site would function with 29 spaces.
Right. The reserved component is something we discussed last month, right? You remember? And came to an understanding with the applicant that that would be an implied designation, right? It's not built into the calc requirement. Make sense?
There's no requirement in the city code to reserve.
Correct. Right. So, but again, we had a long discussion about designating. Right,
Yeah, I think there was a
reserving.
concern from the board about this, having the seniors potentially have to walk further
Right.
to their cars.
I think the question might be, if you take away 6 spaces from the 29, there's still enough spaces provided to be shared between the affordable housing use, the retail use, and the other residential uses.
Right. So that's where we left off last month.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So just a level set. Right. But there is this question of, can we, based on the 85th percentile, to be extremely conservative and cautious, can we look at the possibility of, and I'll start with the idea of land banking, and I'm glad to hear you say that there is some potential to do that, because just from my point of view, it's always best to, if we don't need to build them, don't, but reserve them should we need that as a fallback. Right, that's sort of my working theory. So let's talk about whether, oh, there you go.
So we thought we'd bring an exhibit with us. Obviously, you haven't had a chance to review this, but it's 2 hours off. Good
Yeah.
Basically, what we did was we showed that there's a way to put some 60-degree parking in here. We would probably have to just extend out the pavement a little bit further on this area just to give it a little bit more of a back out area, but we feel that we can get those 4 in there. There is another opportunity for over here, but I feel like these are a little more awkward and right near the main entrance to the project. So these are 4 viable land bank parking spaces, and it's right near that tree that we're all looking to preserve. This is the option we came up with quickly today.
What are your thoughts, John?
I don't want to threaten that tree myself.
No.
But, and there is a deck there, which, is it a raised deck?
Yeah, it is.
It seems to me if we're going to go with the 29 as the requirement, there's 2 ways to look at this consistent with the code. You can land bank 4 spaces, and you could do it that way, or you could do it south of 8 Cross, You could do it there.
Yep.
Originally, you had parking there.
Yeah, we did it.
And that would be one way of doing it.
Yep.
A more conservative way, maybe. Or you could do what we've done, the board has done on other commercial mixed-use projects on Main Street, like the one on the corner of Elm Street or 416 Main Street. You waived commercial parking
Yeah. Well,
and just required residential parking.
we waived a portion of commercial parking on this last month. This would just be waiving more.
Yeah.
Those 4 more. So, what are your thoughts, board?
So you could waive all 10 retail spaces.
Yep.
And then you would have the requirement for 24 spaces. So you could waive 9 of those, 9 out of the 10.
Yep.
I mean, what our office discussed was that generally it's best practice to go with what your consultant has recommended, and there would need to be a
Generally.
rationale for why we would.
I understand. Generally.
I'm a paid consultant too.
I understand.
I think we overpark things.
You're an excellent and not overpaid consultant, so.
So anyway, I think it's, there's ways to do it. I think if you want to land bank spaces, I would land bank them where you didn't threaten that tree.
Yeah.
Could you speak to the drawbacks of land banking versus just waiving outright?
There's not a big, if they can fit it in, I don't know of any case, not since I've been here, where we've land banked spaces and 6 months later we needed them.
Yeah. Okay.
So
It's good to know.
likely it's just a justification on the plan that you could supply it if you needed to.
Yep.
But I have never seen it, maybe somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, go back and say, you got to do them.
Yeah.
It does provide a nice safety valve, because once you waive the spots,
You don't get them back. Yeah.
But you do have the county lot, which is a block and a half away, and that's
Yeah.
50% full on a peak day.
Yeah, and in this instance, to some degree, the advantage of the land banking, at least the way they've been laying out here, threatens that tree, should they, need to be invoked, and really screws up that backyard. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I personally am in support of an additional waiving.
Is that theoretically consistent with what you said? To waive the retail spaces? Or does that get in the way of the shared parking analysis somehow?
The waiving of the method of how you're going to waive the spaces does not really affect our analysis. That is more about the board,
Yep.
finding your path through the way your zoning code is written to lower the number of spaces provided.
Yep.
What I'm saying is that our analysis shows that the site would function with 29 shared spaces. You can land bank them and kind of have the safety valve, or just waive it entirely.
Okay.
I think what the question that goes back to David's question was about, if you take away the 6 that are reserved solely for the assisted living component, there's still enough spaces shared amongst the other 3 uses to function.
Yeah, and again, we spent a lot of time talking about those priorities last month, right? The assisted living, top priority, those take precedence, those are going to be designated. We've all agreed. And then for the other residents, then, there is ample parking. It's really the commercial parking aspect that we're looking at here, waiving.
Here's one, just a quick observation. If we're simply setting the commercial requirement to the side, the residential requirement, without taking into account any shared parking considerations, would probably make some sense to not be taking into account shared parking considerations. We're just talking about the residential use, but would be 24 spaces. The 9 for the structures that are currently there, the 9 for the workforce affordable housing, and 6. So, the proposal that's in front of us right now is basically just meaning that it would definitely seem like if that's what we're doing, we should be doing what we can to try to preserve potential parking space in the future if it's needed.
So what I'm hearing is that you're in support of the land bank scenario.
Well, compared to what, a non-land bank scenario?
Well,
Yes.
the non-land bank scenario would be a waiver scenario, which we have the authority to do, and again, which we did when we were last together in understanding some of the restrictions. We agreed, we left that meeting with the understanding that we were agreeing to waive the commercial in order to accommodate the residential parking, including the assisted living piece.
Right.
So this is just the question of whether, with this new calculation discussed by Kip, and the higher number, right, those additional 4, whether we're going to require a land banking, or whether we're going to simply bulk those extra 4 into the waiver.
I mean, as between those alternatives, I would have to think it would be much more preferable to land bank. I mean, if we're not even providing the number of parking spaces that are coming up as what should be provided in your analysis, then, I mean, like literal asphalted parking spaces, then yeah, I think we should be looking into that.
Yeah.
I mean, would it be possible to see if we could land bank some parking in other spots besides, having to remove that tree? I know the initial application, although there were some issues with the parking layout, it did provide a zoning compliant parking layout.
I wanted to ask about that because I know that when I went over John Clark's comments for our original meeting on this back in, I think, June, it was an open question whether that could be built, and then I think as we switched over onto the current proposal, did that ever get answered?
The original 34 space layout they did, conceptual layout, did not meet some of the aisle requirements. So I'm not sure they could fit 34 spaces on that site the way it was originally proposed. But they can certainly fit 29.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But also, what of the, the within 800 feet, finding the ability to adequately park the commercial component to this? That's still an available factor, right? So take that into consideration when you're sort of thinking about the commercial aspect to this parking. Again, the only component that we would be considering waiving here are the commercial spots. And again, as we have done in applications past, where there simply isn't the ability to park any commercial or residential, the fact that within 800 feet there is available parking is, a part of the consideration when thinking about a waiver situation.
Well, I mean, unless we require some pretty significant changes at this point, I think it's clear we're giving them a waiver to some degree.
Well, again, we left last month with a waiver to some degree, yes. Yes.
Even with the 29 spaces and having 4 of them land bank, there would be a waiver of 5.
Exactly. So now we're looking at a waiver of 9, right? So.
You could put 3 parking spaces on 8 Cross, slightly angled, so that they had to go out one way, and then 1 over behind the tree.
Yeah, it wasn't intended to be a one-way entry there, so it would either be that we could put 2 in parallel there, or we could put 3 or 4 in perpendicular, but we have to make the travel way a little bit wider as well.
Not if they're angled.
Right now, it's
What if
20.4 feet travel way.
What if you made the north one, what if you made it a one-way circulation and the out was where it's the 2-way and the in is where, on the north side?
The only issue with that is that behind the Dondero building, they have access easement to go through here. So it's.
So they need 2-way?
They should have that, especially with their own dumpster and everything else that they have back there.
I'd say to weigh in on the waiver versus the land banking. I would say I would be in favor of providing did you say there's 24 spaces that are needed for all of the residential? 23?
We're providing 25.
I understand that. But I feel like the residential house in the middle would be a terrible place to live with the parking right in the backyard like that. It would be my opinion that we should provide parking for the residential need and waive the half of the commercial. Then it's clearly like residential only parking. You could put a sign. It's, you know, much less complicated for who can park there. And then land bank some, you know, waive half of the commercial and land bank a few. But, you know, I mean, just the layout of the parking for the residences on Cross Street, it's really unpleasant.
It is. It then, you know, becomes the option of, you know, a
I mean, that-
buyer, whether that's something they want to, you know, live with. Yeah.
Right, but it's also, the city lives with that. Like, that's an in perpetuity issue.
Nothing's permanent. But, yeah, no, I see what you're saying. It's not ideal, but, and I think that the
Or
effort-
perhaps land bank the parking, you know, on the other lot where they originally were going to park everybody.
Is that an option?
Which we brought up last month, and it still hasn't been addressed.
Land banking on where, I'm sorry?
The
152.
lot across the street.
They weren't excited about that idea.
Well, they have to also understand.
They would have to resubmit for a different parcel.
Yeah.
It changes the application.
I think this gentleman has something he wants to add.
I probably should address that a little bit. That, obviously, there's a million options out there, but that's something we're particularly unexcited about. We invested a huge amount in acquiring, in a very sensitive and considerate way, these 3 properties on this side of the street in order to get the parking on the same side of the street so people wouldn't have to cross the street. We're really close to being able to satisfy all the requirements with no waivers. We're really asking for a pretty mild accommodation. The operators of the ESHI units tell us that this is not going to need 6 spaces. This is going to need 1 space part-time for a support person, and it's going to need maybe 1 space for visitors, and none of those 9 apartments will have occupants that will own and operate vehicles. Nonetheless, if you want 6 of them dedicated to spaces dedicated for that purpose, we'll accommodate that. It really impacts our ability to creatively reposition and improve the property on the west side of Cross Street. That's a sad collection of properties that we really want to continue to improve, and we really don't want to encumber it any more than we have to.
Thank you. Understood.
You know, if that's if there is an argument to be made where this is overparked, as you seem to feel that it is, I just think there's way too much parking on that little space.
So, all the more reason for, in my view, a waiver.
Yeah.
That would be
is that how you're
consistent with
landing?
the precedent we've had for other parcels
Yes.
like this, where we waived the commercial and
Right, but even,
just satisfied the
can we
residential.
remove any of the, if you say there's 23 that are required for residential, is it really 23 based on, the use?
Yeah.
Or is it less?
Or is it less,
It's
so.
actually working out to be less than 1 parking spot per dwelling unit, so.
Yeah, but 9 of those units are frail elderly who don't have cars.
Right.
How long is the property going to be restricted to senior housing, the contract with the state?
Joe, you'd probably be better off handling that one.
We have a bunch of different programs there. The ESHI one specifically, which is the Empire State Supportive Housing Initiative, which covers 9 of the units, starts with a 15-year lease. It's got a 15-year extension. We work on the assumption, and the state works on the assumption they're going to want to extend for that full 30 years. And our assumption is that that it would continue in that use indefinitely. We have no ability to terminate it before the 30-year period is up. They could terminate it at the end of the 15-year period.
Okay, so you're in support of waiver.
Yes, and reducing the parking as much as possible.
Well, that goes down another whole road. How many? If yeah. Any further thoughts, Kevin?
I would tend to lean towards land banking rather than waiving, just because I want to be conservative about waiving spots in general.
Yep.
Where a property owner has the ability to provide the spots, they should make every effort to do that. And I think they have. I think the parking they're providing seems to be adequate, and they've done a lot of, they've gone to a lot of effort to do that. And to save that tree, I think it's like the best they can do at this point. But it's the practical difference because of the site condition between the two alternates we're discussing is pretty small. It's almost, academic or procedural, you know?
So you're in favor of the idea of land banking up where they're showing it right now?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm assuming you're the same.
Yeah, I mean, that's basically what I said. One other thing we should be talking about, is we've been talking about this from the perspective of the notion of waiving the commercial requirement, to the extent we're not waiving it, putting that commercial requirement into land banking. Does that mean that the waiver that we're granting, meaning it's effectively a development condition, is going to be that this parking lot is for residential use? Don't park a commercial vehicle.
That's essentially what we're saying, yes.
Or does it mean we're signing off on this number of parking spots, do as you will?
I think the way we last left it was something somewhere in between, right? That, and I don't know, maybe this is false logic, that when we last discussed, the 6 required for those with disabilities would be designated for that. But it sounds to me like if they don't have cars, there's no need for it.
Well, you have to also consider that they're going to have nurses or attendants. There's,
Sure.
Ambulances are going to be coming in and out. So, and that's not to say that each and every one of these people don't drive or don't have a car. So there has to be something for them, for these people that come to visit, that take care of them, the attendants, the nurses, whatever, that there's somewhere to park.
Yeah.
And I don't
Well,
see that.
the sense is that there would be somewhere to park. The question, meaning, they've met the requirement for the residential component, right? That's a fact. The question is whether it makes sense then to, of those total parking spaces, which are all residential, make sure that those required for assisted living are designated, those 6, right?
Yeah.
As opposed to, you got enough for everybody who lives there, and, you can choose, right? So,
Yeah, so the notation we put on the plan was that we showed the 6 spaces, and the priority is senior first. And Hudson River Housing will be running this whole project, and they're going to have that authority to designate those spaces to those that may or may not have cars. And then it would fall to another
resident.
choose to basically
right.
Designate the spot, so whether it's one of the other workforce housing units or whatnot, so.
I'm comfortable with that.
Yeah.
Are you comfortable with that?
I don't know. I just think, well, what you're saying is that the spaces will be designated for those apartments.
There are
Yes.
6 spaces that are specifically reserved and prioritized for senior housing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Senior and
Because,
elderly.
having lived with someone that's incapacitated, and I have I live in a private house, I have a driveway, but sometimes, you have 2 cars in the driveway. So now how do I get them out? Or how does that bus get in there? So it's it's something to really be taken seriously.
And
So,
that's part of the shared
yeah.
parking
Yeah.
analysis as well. though.
So this is
Because
good that
there are, in
there
theory,
are
some
di-
people that may be going to work.
Right.
Yep.
And then other people that might be coming in for the commercial uses. That's the point of the shared parking analysis
Yeah.
portion of the.
No,
of
so
the
I
design.
feel comfortable with that they're,
Okay.
that they have the designated spaces.
Go back to our workshop conversation.
Yeah. So why don't you do the
We
land
wouldn't
bank
be
parking
having this
And come up
conversation.
with a solution that avoids the tree.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's where we're
Do
headed.
that?
Okay.
Can avoid the 44-inch oak tree? Come up
Land
with a
bank.
four,
Yeah, I
four
can
land
come up
bank
with
spaces.
something. I just think that there'll be a little more awkward, closer cross street, but
Well, again, if the theory holds true that in our experience, never needed to evoke, activating land bank spaces, then,
it could be that we do a combination. Maybe we do two by
Yeah, two up
the other
top, two
side,
down.
two
Yeah,
over here.
that's-
So we'll play
that
around
sounds
with that,
feasible.
but,
Thank you.
Is that something that we can just designate the number and still be able to move along procedurally so that? we
yes,
don't
I
have
think
to
that's probably a good idea.
Belabor this anymore.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we can definitely authorize Chris's office to generate draft resolution for.
We already have those.
We already have it.
Yes.
Oh, forgive me. My notes are in error.
They are watermark stamped with the draft, but we can provide, the one thing that I would want
There they are.
to still make a couple revisions, because we included both 25 and 29. So we would need to make the revisions to show that, and we would also like to make any approvals granted tonight, subject to review by the city's planner,
Sure.
city engineer, city's traffic consultant, just to make sure it all works out.
So then with those,
1 second. The other thing I'd like to add, Dan, is your stormwater analysis will have to be updated to account for those land bank
Sure.
spaces in the
Right.
event they were needed. So that'll have to be updated.
so then is the board comfortable with the modifications that Chris just described? And we can certainly delineate them again, understanding that you're going to update the final to reflect that. With those modifications pending, are you comfortable with a motion to approve? For land bank, yes.
What's I didn't really get a clear answer on what we're doing with regard to this residential versus commercial use.
There will be, so it sounds like since you've met, so again, once again, since you've met all of the residential now as it's drawn, we're land banking, we're asking the applicant, and they're going to come back with a revised application, to land bank 4 additional spaces. And those ostensibly then, if they ever were activated, would be used by commercial, because it wouldn't otherwise be necessary for the residential because you have enough already.
And there's one, because it's 25, not 24, there's one commercially designated
Already.
available space.
Can we
Right.
land bank that and just make it strictly, so that we have strictly covered the residential and all of the commercial is land banked? Because why have an extra parking space if,
Well, bear in mind, we've got 2 of those parking spaces are handicap spots. That aside, it may not be that good of an idea not to provide any parking for commercial. I mean, what if somebody needs to unload furniture? What?
Yeah, I think it's good to have
You
at
got,
least one
you got
space.
one. So,
Okay, well, that's all right, that's what I was asking.
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
That's kind of an important issue to make sure.
yeah, I'm sorry, I thought we were already at that understanding, so, any more clarification needed? Okay, great. So, Chris, you understand where we need to land with the final, right? And then, you mentioned 2 other modifications, just now.
The number,
Review
29
by-
or 24?
Yeah, so we would need to, it would be 25, 29 approved. 4 of those are land based.
Correct.
You show 25 on the plans. You provide revised plans and a stormwater management. And all of this is subject to approval of the city's planner, city's engineer, and the city's traffic consultant.
Great. So again, with those modifications, do I have a motion to approve?
Can we just clarify one thing? I'm sorry. I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page, that we're designating 6 parking spaces for the senior, and the other 19 spaces that are going to be there are shared parking spaces. between the residential and commercial.
Yeah, effectively, yes.
Yeah, okay, I just want to, at the end of the day, in use, we're not signing this as residential parking only. Yeah.
Yes, I get, what I'm saying is that the requirement is
Yeah,
built into the shared.
Understood.
Right,
Okay.
and it's met.
I just want to make sure that we're
Yeah.
on the
Okay.
same page. Yeah, okay.
Great. Anything else?
Motion.
Motion by Karen.
Second.
Second by Kevin. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Great.
Does that inherently take care of the neg deck as well, because that was included in that resolution, or did you need to do a neg deck first?
We did, well, you're right, we should have done the amended secret neg deck. So, I saw it there too, I should have known. Oh God, I hate it when this happens. Do we actually have to reverse that in order to do the secret first?
Yeah, just to be on the safe side.
We don't do this that often. How do we do that? Motion to disapprove or what? Okay, so let's go back on that initial approval.
Let's say a motion to table that,
Yeah.
to address the secra, and then reapprove the site plan deployment.
Great. So a motion to table so that we can approve SECRA and then come back to an approval on the site plan.
Motion.
Motion by Kevin.
Second.
Second by Karen. All in favor?
Aye.
So then let's go to the SECRA neg deck. Again, drafted. I don't believe any amendments are necessary based on what we've been talking about tonight. So with that, hopefully everybody's read it and are clear on it, and I'm ready to accept the motion to approve.
We just need to, it has both parking numbers, so that's the only amendment that needs to be
Right, that needs to be amended.
amended.
Okay.
So a motion to approve
With the parking number amended.
the parking number amended with showing 4 landing.
Motion.
Motion by Karen.
Second.
Second by Kevin. All in favor?
Aye.
So then we will now then go back to the approval for the amended site plan and certificate of appropriateness resolution. Motion.
Motion.
Motion by Karen.
Second.
Second by Kevin. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Sometimes it takes us a little while to get it right, but we got it.
About parking at all? or-
Anything else? What's that?
I was just wondering if you want to talk about parking at all.
Thank you very much. Quick break. I know this eats into our 15 minutes remaining, John. We're back. So we'll move to the next item on our agenda, third and last item, which is the continued review of an application for a special use permit and site plan approval. This is for a hotel and event space at 1113 Walcott Avenue. Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. Members of the board, for a brief presentation, Taylor Palmer with Cuddy and Fader on behalf of the applicant, joined by our traffic consultant, as well as Dan Kohler, filling in for Mike Bodendorf of Hudson Land Design, and the property owner. As you mentioned, we are before you for our continuing site plan, special permit review, and certificate of appropriateness applications for the project. We have had a chance to review the draft resolution that has been forwarded. I guess that was last month, and now as revised, that is before the board. And we do have some additional limited comments which we'll address during the review of that resolution. Just for by way of procedural update, of course, back in July, the planning board adopted its negative declaration for the project following the 2-year review of the application. We also, at that meeting, the board also adopted a LWRP consistency determination, finding that the project's consistent with those policies. Our subsequent July 25th submission tried to work to address comments from the board's July 11th meeting, and also identified some other details. Just some minor other updates. The traffic and parking management plan was revised to require the 2-hour gap between the meetings, between events of any size, notwithstanding the proposal for the 1.5 and the findings supporting that. We also adjusted that same plan to include some changes limited to the post-monitoring study and the period of time and categories of the events that are being monitored. So that was a question between the board, so it's been updated as reflected in your resolution. And additionally, at the request of the board, we did update the site plan to include proposed building materials, designating a smoking area. That was another discussion that we had, the trash enclosure, and revisions to the proposed historic building and cemetery restoration notes. So those are pretty specific to what the ongoing obligations are, lawn mowing, brush overgrowth, and clearing, and then, of course, the applicant's affirmative efforts to pursue best efforts at the restoration that require outside consultation and additional funding. That was also updated into the resolution as we reviewed. We respectfully submit that these latest revisions and obviously the substantive changes that have been made throughout the long review of this project, responsive to the board, the public, and its consultants, among many others, the reduced capacity, the limited hours, the days of operation, and the adoption of mitigation measures really established how we've satisfied the city's zoning code standards and the special permit regulations for this site. So we're certainly pleased to address any other comments the board might have. And again, we've provided comments on the draft resolution.
Yeah, so let's just go directly to your comments. I think there were two specifically. One having to do with the validity, the duration of the special permit. I think the request was, and maybe you can sort of clarify this better than I can repeat it, but that the duration be segmented between the accessory conference and the hotel.
Correct. So the board had spent most of the time really focused on the event space accessory use to the principal uses on the site. So there was a discussion at the last meeting about having the special permit be renewable for the special permit itself. We're suggesting that the renewable component, that was the concern of the board, was that of the event space itself. Certainly as a hotel, having continuity for an operator or otherwise would certainly, that would put a real damper on any operator wanting to come into the site if each year they had to renew the hotel component. So ultimately we were suggesting that the renewability be focused on that, and the same being true of the cafe space. That component of the accessory to the hotel itself is a naturally, regularly occurring and certainly something you'd want to provide as an amenity, somewhere to provide food or drink for folks staying in the hotel itself. So we were suggesting simply that the renewability of the special permit be associated it's a lot of words together, exclusively and explicitly for the event space component.
Okay. We can talk about that as a board. Then the other one having to do with the church use, the church use being allowed to continue up until issuance of a CO. The thinking there was that that's outside of our purview,
right.
More focused on our esteemed building inspector. So.
Yeah, it was no objection. We just suggested it only because it had been part of the discussion, but we fully agree that it is a building inspector determination. I think there's extensive record reporting to the fact that they can maintain that use until such time as it's...
Yeah, so what we're going to do is we're going to strike that piece from this resolution. We're going to ask Bruce's office to follow up with just a outline.
Yeah, and that's not in the draft, so that's not included.
Great. Okay, so then let's get back to the duration and the separability, if you will, of the special use permit and the renewal period of 1 year. So as it's written now, it applies to the entire
correct
parcel.
Right. We just highlighted that we thought that might have been the intent based on the discussion was concerning the broad discussion collectively throughout the last 2 years was a focus on the conference center and event space, not the concerns with the hotel needing to be brought together. And of course, the site plan itself will have enforcement mechanisms if that use itself is not otherwise complying with, but it was the event space that was triggering the renewability.
Let's discuss the relative merits either way. As a board, any specific thoughts?
John, I'm kind of interested. Can we get Clark to weigh in?
Yeah, sure.
I'm not a financial person, but I would find it difficult to believe that any hotel operator would come in if they only had a year approval. So I'm sympathetic to the idea that the hotel, which has the available parking for the hotel, is the principal use of the property, that
Yep.
that could have full approval, and the event space would have conditional approval or a year approval based on the monitoring of operations and that sort of thing, to make sure that everything's working according to the management plan. I think the same argument could be made for the cafe, that you wouldn't get an operator to go in and put all the investment into building a space without having long-term viability in mind. So that's my feeling, is that it makes sense to me to make the one-year contingent approval or the one-year leased approval, or whatever you want to call it, for the event space, which is the operation issue that is of most concern.
Yeah, no, it carries a lot of logic.
Makes sense.
Any objections then to the thinking?
I'm skeptical about the whole financial expectations that have resulted from the limitations that you've put on yourself because of the impact of the assembly use. And so that's, I think, one of the biggest issues is whether the plans that have been put forward are realistic for the development and of the space for that year. That's for any of the restrictions, with or without the cafe and the hotel being severable. So it's all reducing the amount of the ability for accountability of the agreements, the operation agreements that we're entering into.
Yeah, and again, the applicant has evaluated the functionality and certainly the ability to function on the site. I mean, this is the minimum viable, really, alternative, but we're doing that to address the public's comments and the board's comments respective to this site. So they have looked at that, and naturally, that I think we've highlighted the key focus there being the hotel and the cafe space being in tandem, working together. You know, and of course, the event space is a key component, but the viability of having an operator, in particular, as it relates to renewability, that's, I think, a very specific
my sense is
distinction.
That, and again, business cases and financial, all this is none of our purview, right?
Right.
So, but theoretically, the application of the year renewal to the special use permit specific to the event space only theoretically enhances the financial viability
Yes.
of the whole Megillah.
That's a fair
That's my sense, right? So if that's a concern, Kevin, then again, you know, I'm leaning toward this being a logical request as an amendment to the approval. So with that, it sounds as though, based on your concerns about viability, you'd be in support of the same. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I just want to make sure we're clear that what the applicant is asking for as it relates to the renewal period being applicable to the event space, such that, and as John, I thought, well described, the ability for operators to see viability in the cafe and the hotel unencumbered by that renewal period adds to the viability.
Right, you're looking for a rational relationship. If you had a mixed-use apartment building that had a restaurant on the first floor, certain codes may regulate through a special permit that restaurant, but they're not going to require the apartments to come back before the board annually for renewal. So it's, you know, it's not exactly on point, but it's the same sort of discussion here, that the driver or the rational relation of a condition that requires an applicant to come back, which is already very significant, to come back, is tied to that specific use.
Might I just
Sure.
briefly? I mean, what happens if, you know, the hotel doesn't have that special use permit aspect, but then the church site, the event center, does get shut down? And so, I mean, if either of them are causing problems and they don't get renewed, that's going to cause.
The principal use is the hotel. The accessory uses are the cafe and the event space. So the principal use wasn't the 2 years of discussion before this board. It was the event space that's an accessory component.
Right.
So that was the driver for parking discussions, all the discussions before the board that we've addressed and substantially reduced this project tied only to the event space.
So essentially, if you're not renewed on the special use permit for the event space, but the hotel is exempt and the cafe is exempt, the hotel continues to operate.
Correct.
And the event space sits idle.
They would have to work out they'd have to be before your board for some type of amendment or other type of use in the space.
All right. Again, all of this to me makes logical sense. So I just want to hear from the rest of the board. Because we're going to either keep it as is or we're going to amend it. So let's get to it. Which is it?
I agree with the amending. It seems logical. Also.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I don't know, it already sounds like we're getting ready to flip this, so.
What do you mean?
Well, you know, it's already looking into the future that it's not going to succeed, so maybe we.
I don't think, honestly, Donna, that's not what we're talking about here. We're simply talking about a request by the applicant to amend language in the resolution.
No, I understand.
Right.
I understand.
Specific to this one point. It has nothing to do, honestly, and again, we're talking about viability theoretically, but our purview has nothing to do with viability, right?
Our
That's all
perspective
up
is
to
that the applicant's plans will function as designed, but the board had expressed concern, so the goal was that if there were any instances of we're doing a post-monitoring traffic study, all kinds of things to ensure that everything that is in this plan and has been outlined before the board, even though our consultants, your consultants have all agreed that this works, that if there's any growing pains or these don't function accordingly, your board has the ability to reevaluate or reconsider those components of it. So that's why we're focused on a specific issue, and it's that event space, not the hotel or the cafe that have been driving those conversations. So that's this specific component is just saying that the renewability, each year the city is looking at this, or the planning board, it's specific to this space. Typically, this type of requirement to come back before your board, it's very atypical. That's not something you typically see in our approvals. So with that, we're providing sort of an additional ability for the board to sort of look back at this if it doesn't comply. Again, we're submitted, and as proposed, and your consultants have all reviewed this, it works, but this is just another sort of, I think I referred to it as a belt to the suspenders on top of the other belt.
So, I mean, the amendment that you're proposing makes logical sense to me. My overarching question was, in granting a special use permit that pertains to a use in the first place, because sometimes, you know, we're granting special permits that are actually really dimensional regulations about whatever they're labeled. Is it normal to require someone to come back after some period of time for renewal of the
It's
permit?
not unusual, and we've invoked it before. For a renewal period for a special use permit?
I don't remember doing it.
For example, you didn't require a renewal requirement of the other outdoor event space in the city that came before your board recently. It's not a typical requirement. It's certainly permissive if there's a rational relationship or an essential nexus between the condition and what it is that you're conditioning. Here, the board has expressed concern about the operations. We put forth a plan that will satisfy that. So, of course, we would ask that it not be included, but we're not going that far. We're just simply saying that.
I'll say two things. I remember one very specific one, and it was my own, and this was, of course, years ago, and I won't get into the details of it, but the board put conditions on my special use permit to come back and have it renewed. So we've done it before. And in this instance, I think it's appropriate, right? And the applicant obviously agrees. And it's appropriate. And the point of the conversation we're having right now here is it's appropriate most specifically to the component of this application and this special use permit that applies to the event space. And that's the crux of what we're talking about here, that the renewal period of the special use component be specific to the event space and not to the hotel and the cafe.
Yeah, that's what I said. It makes logical sense to me. I had the question I had.
Yeah, and there is precedent for it. It may be
Yes.
limited, but
There
is
absolutely are
precedent.
instances.
Hasn't been done since I've been here. That's
Right.
6 or 7 years.
You weren't here when I had my application.
Well, okay,
No.
let me throw this out there.
Dave.
This is
Bad memory.
A realistic
You weren't here.
concern, whether we're putting a renewal date on this or not, once that permit's been granted, even if they've got to come back and renew it, bottom line, it's not going to be a situation where we suddenly got a blank check to decide whether or not we're going to renew it, barring some sort of significant change in circumstances. We're probably, maybe we have to go back into the back room and get advice from council, but we're likely going to wind up having to renew that permit.
Yeah, it opens the opportunity for some tweaks to the conditions. That's basically
I'd say that
what it's doing.
The corollary of what I just said as well is how likely is it that things are going to be different than what we're expecting?
That's
and with the conference space center, that's the whole thing we've been talking about
Yeah.
the whole time. So it does to me make some sense to do it that way.
Yeah, yeah. So to answer your question, you can't predict the future, but it's basically a safety valve.
Our goal is our position is that this works and it's going to function and it's going to operate accordingly. It's giving the board an atypical, as John mentioned in the last 7 years, I agree, but atypical level of additional authority beyond what would typically be, but it's not that it's impermissive, it's that it's utilizing its special permit authority to include this condition that we come back before your board, and it's ensuring, it's adding further assurance that we're complying with these regulations. There's mentions of enforceability, all of those things. This is the monitoring study, the post-monitoring study, all the things that are being implemented are other checks on what we're saying works.
Yes.
And it's effectively, we're self-imposing it too. We're agreeing to that condition.
That's understood. By the way, I know I don't look that old, but I've been on the board for 18 years. Youch. So, it sounds to me like we're getting to a point where we're going to be comfortable making that
Understood.
amendment. So,
How long would that period?
1 year.
It's forever.
Is that enough?
It's forever.
Well,
It's
the 1 year
annual.
renewal
Right.
is in perpetuity.
Every year.
Correct.
Right? So, yes.
So it comes back to you every year.
For the
Unless the board amends.
Sure.
Okay, so how many meetings a year are we going to be speaking about this?
Well, like John said, they could ask for an amendment. So you go a year down the road, if everything goes fine, maybe the board considers amending it if they request it.
Right,
You're
there could
down
be
the road and there's problems, you're going to have the ability to remedy those problems on the site. You don't want to have 5 years out there and you have no say.
Yeah,
Well, maybe, okay, so, again, trying to bottom line it, I think what we're kind of getting to here is a year is good right now, but we don't really want to lock ourselves into that.
It's not locked in. It could be amended.
The point is, we don't have to lock ourselves into that because it could be amended.
And the applicant, assuming everything functions, there won't be much of a discussion to have with your board. It just will have said, you did the things that are in your plan, things have functioned as they should, see you in 2000, at that point, 25.
Right. Which would be my 20th year.
That's right.
I'm still here.
I mean, if things aren't going well, you could amend it to get rid of that.
Exactly.
Or you could say you're coming back every 10 years or 5 years.
Yep.
You're done. You don't need to come back.
Cool. Okay, do we have to formally make a motion on that amendment? Yeah. Well, when we adopt, we'll say as amended, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so that's the one amendment, and then the one with operating as a church.
removing that piece, right? Okay. So that brings us to the bulk of the draft resolution with amendments, right? Because the latest version I'm looking at here has red line, right? So those red line would be the most recent. And keeping in mind as well, Board, that this resolution does delineate those conditions of the special permit. And also keeping in mind that we have adopted a negative declaration, which again, on SECRA, which again is listed here in the resolution. Is there any discussion about any of those conditions of the special permit as they appear in the resolution? Or any questions by the board? And so therefore, we're at a point where we can...
Sorry, I do have
Yep,
one.
go ahead.
I have one question about the cemetery restoration note. Is that just they're supposed to present a plan before CO for cemetery restoration. Does that come before the board, the plan, or who approves the plan at that point in time?
The way it's written, as I understand it, is there's certain things that on the list that they have to do before the CO. Maintain the property, clean it up. But for a longer term, what you do with the headstones, what do you do for permanent landscaping or, plants, materials or whatever, they want to consult with experts, come up with a plan and submit that by the C of O. And the city building department would approve it.
That's Bruce.
We agree to have it be reviewed by your city planner too.
None of
if
us are
that-
experts on cemeteries, so I
Right.
think, if they've consulted the right experts and it looks legitimate, I don't think there'll be a debate about what
Okay, I just wanted
specifically is in
to
it.
make it clear who's approving that plan.
At this point, Bruce is the police.
Do we need to
Get him in a uniform?
put that?
That's just that's the mechanism of the sort of.
I don't think we would need to, we could if you want, but I think as is.
Yep.
Yeah, Bruce will not be able to issue the CO without it being
Right.
satisfactory.
Yeah, so we'll have to, again, once they submit a plan for restoration, I guess at that point, it would be again, if we're gonna hire an independent consultant, then we could do that.
Right, I guess my concern is, we don't have any standards by which we're approving this plan against, like, what are they, what do they need to meet, and,
Well,
so-
that's why I think it's a smart recommendation you're making, Bruce, that once a plan is submitted by the applicant, the city considers a peer review by a peer consultant to sort of gut check what the applicant is submitting and proposing to you, right?
Yeah, we could find somebody to review it. We could even have the applicant come back to the board after we have that review, so that if there are items that need to be addressed, the board can still address it at that point.
I think it might be, just if I might weigh in, part of the applicant is also working with the Beacon Historic Society. We're working with cities, not consultants, I guess, effectively, but with representatives of other,
Yeah. Quite honestly, personally.
looking at them,
I trust Bruce. I trust those entities. Right. I don't necessarily think the planning board wants to be in the business of reviewing and approving.
We'd accept an outside peer review of, some type of an escrow to that effect.
My feeling is if the building department says it looks good, if there's any contentious issues that can't be resolved, then you get an independent person to come in and has more expertise than any of us.
And I trust that Teresa won't be gentle.
All right. Good. So we're good there?
Yes.
Okay. So then, to that end, any other questions or comments or notes on the draft resolution we have in front of us?
Now,
No.
I have a question. It doesn't have to do with the draft resolution. Is that all right?
Yeah.
It has to do with the use as a church,
Mhm.
right? And if we approve this, right, and it takes 3 years for this development to, right?
Right.
And each individual year, we give a continuance or whatever that hasn't been developed, what,
Can only be used as a church until
Yeah,
it
what-
receives a CO.
but that includes, are there other assembly uses that would be normal and,
So the building inspector would have to make all determinations.
Right.
It's what's permitted today. That's all we can say beyond, Bruce would have to make, if, you know,
Right.
the Church of Kevin, you know, Byrne
Right.
comes in, that's one thing. If I don't know, whatever you may, what other Kevin, you know,
We had a
joke I can
guitar
make.
playing priest
It would have to go to the,
tonight.
yeah, it'd have to go to the building inspector for any not crystal clear
Yeah.
determination.
The way I understand it is
recommended that the
typical and customary use of church uses.
Correct.
I recommended that the building department, the building inspector, write something up in advance, so there's no question about what's allowed and what's not. And that certain church-related uses are okay because they're considered.
If the issue comes up about what we can use it for, we'll have to contact Bruce, independent of the approvals before your board, because it's the existing use. It's not a future use. It's
Right,
only
but
what's
it's
permitted.
completely outside of our approval process.
Correct.
It's, you could pull this application right now, you could.
Yes.
Use
You use it as a church.
intended.
Correct. Right.
Right?
Exactly
So
right.
if the development plans, if in the foreseeable, a certain amount of time, things can take a long time
Yes.
to come to fruition.
Sure.
I've been involved in some of these complicated projects, they take years, financing and other things.
Yeah.
So.
So,
that
yeah,
was-
no, I think, again,
Yeah, we're trying to better the conditions on the site than what otherwise could be under the existing use. That was part of the whole seeker discussion here, so.
so typical and customary uses as a church with belts and suspenders. Bruce gets a lot of homework from this meeting.
Yeah,
for some reason.
and over the next week or so, I'll
You're
try
gonna
to
outline
draft
those.
draft a memo of the actual uses that are currently allowed on the property.
Fantastic.
I guess basically in line with what the current church is using, you know, on the site currently.
Yep. Great. Anything else? If not, since we are a 5-member board tonight, and typically 7, it may make sense in advance of actually acting on this to just take a quick straw poll. I'm getting tired and hungry. Just to kind of give a sense of where we're at as a board for adopting this, and then, you know, potentially, again, since we're 5 instead of 7, which we normally are, holding this over till next month.
Understood.
So let's just go around. Should we vote on an adoption tonight, where do you land?
Well, we haven't tonight really talked that much about the standards that actually govern the special use permit designation, but based on everything that I have seen go into the record and as well as what's come out of the meetings, I can't see how what is being proposed is going to be more impactful or burdensome on the community than what could be done right as a church usage right now. Based on that, I don't really feel like I have much of a choice but to, in general terms, sign off on this.
Yep. That's a very honest answer. Thank you. Okay. Kevin? And actually, let's just go back to what you mentioned about the special use. I can't remember exactly what you said or how you worded it, but the special use conditions, they're in the resolution.
Yeah.
Yeah. So is there anything beyond what we're reading and will be memorializing in the resolution that you're?
No.
Yeah, okay.
As a matter of land use regulation, putting something into the category of a special use permit means that it reflects a legislative determination that the use is at least with, under certain conditions or with certain mitigating factors, acceptable.
Yep.
So from that framework, you're then looking at it compared to what is allowable as a matter of right, and would this be significantly more detrimental to the community than that is? Based on that, so I wasn't talking about, even though
I got you.
thing in front of
Yeah.
me, I wasn't talking about the terms of the actual.
Spoken like a true zoning board chair and lawyer. Thank you. Kevin?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, this has been an application that's been of a lot of public concern, and that's because the original zoning intent didn't contemplate this being used as an assembly space in the way that is being discussed and is of most concern, right? It's the uses that generate noise and traffic and other things, all of which we've dealt with, and the secret process has been, right? It's been a convoluted process. The set of special agreements that we have are very convoluted. The set of uses that are being proposed, the hotel, the accessory use, all those other things, which I think weren't part of the original intent of the applicant, are convoluted and make this a very complicated application. It's not a simple thing, right? It was, and the reason, that's why it took 2 years for this, is there was a constant series of amendments and limitations put upon the uses that were being contemplated and approved because of the special approval. Part of that complication makes it, puts a burden on the community for the compliance, and it puts a burden on the applicant to continually have to reapply. Obviously, it's preferable to have as-of-right applications, right? As-of-right uses, so that these special applications don't need to be, special permits don't need to be so burdensome on the applicant and and worrisome to the community. So those are some of my concerns, that this wasn't part of what was contemplated in the original zoning of the area, right? Because of the dense adjacent residential uses. And but if you are doing a rational, if you're going to rationally, it's difficult to find, it's easy to imagine that this is not a rational proposal in many ways, right? But unfortunately, I don't think that it's, I think that there are limitations on my ability to project what my judgment on whether this makes sense or not. So, as skeptical as I remain, I think that there's that legally you have managed to conform to the requirements of the zoning.
So, would that be an aye?
I wanted to say all that. This has gone on for a long time.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that.
And I appreciate you giving me that opportunity.
Yep.
Because
Yep.
I'm still skeptical about this, and I don't think it's good for the applicant or for the community that this process went on like this. Obviously, it was very expensive and long-term, and I do not think that it's all going to go as expected in many ways.
This may not have been exactly what City Council had in mind when that HDLO, I got that wrong, district got enacted, but.
Yep, but we're here now, so just as part of the straw poll, you'd be in support, you'd be in support.
I'm compelled.
Kevin, I'm trying to get to how you would vote.
I wish this was a different project. I wish it was.
I get it. All of that valid, makes sense, it's been a long process.
And a special use
as
permit
far
is
as
an opportunity to do that.
As far as the straw poll, How would you vote, Kevin? I just want to,
Okay.
get a sense
Yeah.
for where we're at
think-
tonight.
I think at this point, I don't have a choice but to vote aye.
Okay, thank you. Karen?
Could you just speak to the issue of the zoning, the question on the, whether this, it was,
Are you asking John Clark?
yes,
Yeah.
I'm asking John Clark. Because in my reading, this is specifically allowed as a special use permit.
Right.
So,
Yes, it's in the law that hotel and accessory uses to the hotel are permitted use, are especially permitted use in the HDLO district, and this qualifies.
okay.
So it is contemplated in the laws. It's not inconsistent with the district as imagined, because the council put this provision in the law as an incentive to restore and maintain historic properties, to have some incentive to do this. And if you want this really important church to be maintained, there has to be some sort of use for it in the future, and churches don't seem to be as viable as they used to be in some cases. Obviously, some churches are thriving and some aren't. So it is consistent with the law. I would have bet at the beginning of this process this was not be approved, but the applicant has made diligent compromises all the way along the line. And I think the crucial one was limiting the hours such that this can't be really used for a concert venue. It's more of now an event venue that's consistent with church-type activities. So, and the fact that the board approved the negative declaration last time takes certain other issues like noise and parking and traffic into the area where it's been decided that this is not going to cause significant impacts if the operations act as they are outlined.
Thanks, John.
Thank you. That was my understanding as well. I feel like it's been a long journey. As it was first presented, it did not, in my opinion, meet the the events part of that did not meet, the definition of a accessory use given the intensity. I think that the amendments made over time, in the end, it now stands, as clearly as a hotel with an accessory use of a conference center, an event space, and seems to me to meet the requirements of code and the comprehensive plan, and therefore I would have to support the application.
Okay, thank you. Donna?
I don't support this project. I think it's ill-conceived. I think it's out of character.
The question, Donna, is whether,
I don't.
given...
I don't.
How would you vote?
I would vote no.
Okay. So I'll give you the option. Would you prefer to wait till next month where you have more of a
Yeah, may I just discuss with the
representation
applicant,
of
just, they're here, so mind if I just take a minute just to discuss with the
Go
applicant?
ahead.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome to, sure. Yeah, please.
There's one thing that I would like to say. As John Clark said, the applicant is proposing a use that is allowed in the district. It's an accessory use and also as of right. And, I think the record has shown that the applicant has put forth considerable concessions and has, really listened to the board and listened to the community. And yes, some might be against it. However, this application, there's been a lot of work between the planning board and the applicant. There's been a lot of dialogue, there's been a lot of consultants involved. And I think that this shows not only this board's dedication to serving the people of Beacon and making sure what developments happen here are to the best of their ability, harmonious. And I think that the applicant has also shown such a willingness to put forth that same type of spirit. And I think,
Yeah, thanks, I appreciate that. I'll just add, I may have mentioned, but that I've been doing this a long time. And I've seen a lot of the development from the early days, 2003, when Beacon wasn't even on the map, till now, and even, somewhat ironically, through the challenges of the residential, the view,
Yep.
All of the residences where the folks live that are now in opposition to this, all of the struggle and the opposition to even those applications.
Correct.
So, it's part of the evolution, it's part of the growth. We've been able to absorb, accommodate, and continue to be a thriving, growing community, even with countless contentious, concerning applications. And it is, I'll have to say, a testament to, I think, a thoughtful city council who spends a lot of time with great consultancy looking at the zoning, thoughtfully crafting the zoning. Of course, there are some unintended consequences, but I think for the most part, the work that we've done as a city in the hard look at the comprehensive plan in 05-06 to the update 10 years later to the continued focus on appropriate zoning for the city as a growing city, it's all very good work.
Right. I think to Kevin's point, Mr. Chairman, this is showing a project working a process that it's designed to. It's
Yeah.
not designed to be adversarial to not make a project.
Yep.
It's designed to make a project better and in a way that meets with all of the collective, and I think this project has done that. It's gone to the public, it's gone to the board's comments to
Yeah.
really significantly reduce itself and control itself to properly fit within the character of the community.
So the last thing I wanted to say was is that given all of that, and given all of the change and the tumult and the concerns over all of the development that's happened, my hope is that with this application, that the community can absorb this, welcome it, and see it as an opportunity to embrace, a component of our culture as Beacon, as creatives, that can be positive. So the question then goes back to you. How would
Yes,
you like to?
we're prepared to proceed. Yep.
You are, okay. So with that, we'll go to a vote then. I'll accept a motion to adopt the resolution with amendments as discussed, and those have been captured, right? So I'll accept a motion.
Motion.
Motion by Karen.
Second, can we get exactly what those?
Yes, certainly.
changes are, just repeat it right now?
Yeah.
So that if there's any doubt, we can take right now?
Yeah.
I mean, my understanding was the main amendment would be that the accessory use of the conference center is only subject to a one-year renewal period. The hotel is approved.
Right.
And then weren't we doing something with that church restriction?
Cafe.
Yeah, it's not in the resolution, it's been taken out.
We're striking it.
Oh.
It's not in there.
Yeah, it's being stricken. Or actually, we're not even striking it, it wasn't even in.
Because it wasn't in it,
Yeah.
correct.
So we have second by David, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Do we have?
Aye.
Aye. How do you vote, Donna?
I don't think I should bother.
You either vote nay, aye, or you abstain.
I abstain.
So four
Okay. So we have-
yes, and then one abstain.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
We appreciate it.
Okay, so that concludes our regular agenda. We're going to move to, we have 20 minutes, sorry. We have three applications for certificate of appropriateness.
It's not going to work out.
You're good. Thank you so much. It's good to meet you. First one on the agenda, good night.
I hope it
Thank you.
works. I hope it works.
Hi, are you 28 Townsend? Great. Welcome. So there have been challenges in the past when we do these of the record, meaning the recording, being able to pick up. So yeah, if you could, for our benefit and for at least the record, just at the mic, just share what you're submitting to it. Guys,
Sorry.
we're in the middle of a review.
Sorry.
Share. Yeah, please, if you could, just share briefly what it
Okay,
is
so-
you're asking us to approve for you. Describe then some of the
Rieger
things that you brought with you and you'd like us to approve, and we'll go from there.
So Rieger Homes, we have a subdivision on Townsend Street, so we're here for two houses tonight. The first one is 28 Townsend Street. We submitted an elevation,
Yep.
and I think if you have it, I can give, if you would like paper copies, I can give them to you.
I think, unless you guys want them. We have them electronically.
We did have,
Yeah, so,
What are
We
these
have them.
shingles? I'm not familiar with those.
yeah, so the first question is, and again, usually we do this up here, but I've had, people complain that when we do that.
I'll do it however you want.
Yeah, I appreciate that, thank you.
So-
So I think Kevin's
got-
question is, what, Kevin?
My question is,
In the mic.
oh, sorry. My question is, I didn't see the Royal Flagstone Final Shingles as a sample.
Okay, so-
Or as, right? And also, in addition, that's an odd way to use shingles.
They refer to, this is a shaken shingle.
Mhm.
So they refer to, what we're proposing, is what they call a shingle, which I'll show you. Shaken shingle. What we're proposing is a shingle. It has some shakes, they call them shakes and shingles.
And these are these,
This is the look, yeah.
and they come in single shingle,
Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
panels.
And this is the color.
Okay. I mean, I don't know if we have the remit here in some ways, but what you're showing is like a field of shingles, like a hatch in a drawing, right? You see what I'm saying? Above the pitched window. This is lot number one, right? So you have this pitch right here. And then you have a series of shingles that are all going to get cut on a diagonal on a piece of thin, right, trim of some sort. And this is something I've discussed, and I thought, and I know John generally agrees with this sort of thing. When you're using a traditional material like shingles, it really looks odd to treat it as if it is a fake material or that it's like a sheet good that's just printed, right? That isn't how shingles are detailed. Shingles don't go up to the top of a ridge, number one. They don't get trimmed in little triangles on thin pieces of trim, right? And also, generally, you would never, in a traditional or even in a contemporary suburban setting, use that from the tip of a roof gable to the base, right? That isn't how shingles get used. So it looks really weird, is my point. You don't have actual trim around these windows. You're using kind of this would look better without the shingles if you just used hardy board or vinyl siding or anything like that, rather than the shingles. Or if you use shingles, you use them just on the bottom, where you weren't having to trim it around all the angles, right? Which is just gonna look awkward, and it's also gonna be difficult to build. Like, you have to seal all this. All the vinyl has to get closed out with a piece of trim. You have to use like a piece of AZEK, like some sort of integral trim or something like that, right? And what happens is it ends up being a lot of work, and it looks like it was a lot of work, and it doesn't get resolved right? So I really think you'd be doing yourself a favor, and anybody who's looking at this building from a distance a favor, if you just separated out, either got rid of the shingles and just did it straight as clapboard, right? Or if you wanted to break it up more, right, that you use the shingles either on the lower part or separated the gable and use that as a different material. Maybe vertical, right? Like the vertical in the other part of the gable. So it was consistent, right?
Continue this over here.
That would be the way you're already doing it, right? And I think that's the weirdest thing about it, is the fact that you have this kind of like 70s California window with this plastic sheet good that kind of looks like
So, yeah, understood. Are you
you know where I'm
amenable
going.
to treating that elevation any differently, just to Kevin's point?
Yeah, so we can break it,
Mhm.
break it here, or we can break it here.
Yeah, I almost think it'd be better if you didn't do it just at the gable, if you pulled it down. Yeah, maybe not in line with this mullion here, right, this horizontal mullion. Because if you do it right here, it's going to be just these awkward two little things. If you just extend it, but not in a line, I'd actually just do it like 6 inches down, because then that breaks it up more. So you're not just drawing a straight line across. And that would solve your problem.
Okay, great. We tend to generally not try to design things for you, but,
But I couldn't help it, man. That was real.
okay.
I think you'll be glad that happened. And so will your potential purchasers, even if you've sold it already.
So then, as far as you showed us the sort of shake product, right? And then you have a horizontal component, right? Yep. And that's the color you're proposing, along with is the vertical intended to be white or?
And the shingles are the darker.
Yeah, understood. Okay. I mean, as far as the colors, fine. Yeah, and with that slight modification that you agreed to after Kevin's lecture, that's fine.
I couldn't get a job as a critic.
And then you've shared with us as a part of your submission, the shingles are going to be black. So yeah, overall. Yeah. Where does the stone come in?
It's the next one.
Oh, that's the next one. Okay. All right. Well, let's finish off 28. Curious, as far as your trim, like for example, the eaves and the gable ends. What is the plan there, color-wise?
Pardon me?
The trim, the eaves and the gable ends. You've got them colored here in black, or a very dark color.
Yes, so we were going to go dark fascia.
Now, what kind of windows are those? Are those metal or are they wood clad?
Windows are a black vinyl, solid vinyl, yeah.
Yeah, I'm just curious that the thinking behind making the corner trim, the columns, the railings at the porch, and then the eaves and the gable ends, different trim colors. It's rare. It's rarely done. Might look a little odd and out of character.
And it's simpler to just get one type of trim. Right?
Yeah. Would you be amenable to moving the gable ends and the eaves to a white?
Well, we were gonna add some dark trim here, we were going to go with dark fascia, soffit, porch ceiling, and gutters, but
Yeah, look, it's your house.
I mean, white,
I do, look, I'm not passionate about it as passionate as Kevin was, but, fine. I'm just curious, the pictures for reference are for? The color, okay. Okay, so for 28 Townsend, any other questions of the applicant or comments?
No, I had a similar concern on the shingles.
Okay, so it's been resolved to your satisfaction? All right, I'll accept the motion to approve.
Motion.
Second?
Second?
Second by Kevin, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so the next one you have for us is 32 Townsend.
lot 2, which is 32 Townsend. So we're going to introduce a stone on the bottom.
It's not
And
I mean, it's not my favorite.
a dark clapboard, and then this would be the color of the shakes at the top.
Uh-huh. And then the stone. Mhm.
And the stone, and the trim is,
Trim's white?
White trim,
okay.
white windows, white trim.
And the shingles?
Would be this color.
The roof shingles, sorry.
Black.
Okay.
Anything?
It's so much better, it seems. I won't waste everybody's time getting nitpicky.
Okay. I'll motion to approve.
Motion.
Second.
Second by David, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Karen? Yep. David, yeah. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
And then our last item tonight, 80 Church Street, single-family home. Hi.
Hi, how are you?
Doing well.
Make it easy, it's a black roof and white house with black windows.
Okay, so is that, thank you. I like easy. Is that somehow designated as?
There's a house that I took pictures of on the corner of Burplank
And it's
and
hardy
90.
board.
It would be the batten board, white.
Okay, you have white hardy plank, batten board, black asphalt. Perfect.
And the front elevation faces Eliza Street?
Yes.
Yeah, oh, wow, it's very long. And the garage is in the back.
Yeah, there's two driveway cuts.
So the
There was one on
driveway's
Eliza,
on
And there was one on
Church.
Church.
Okay. Motion to approve.
Motion.
Motion by Karen,
Second.
second by David. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening.
You too.
Good luck.
Okay. I will accept a motion. Do you have anything else for the regular meeting?
No, I think in general, I just, and also Bruce, I'd really like people to have more consistency, you know? 'Cause taking pictures, I'm not gonna nitpick this guy, he's just doing a house, but like, it'd be nice if you just somehow got them to the habit of having the applicants, or the guys who are putting together the drawings, just color according to what their, color the elevations according to, in a presentation. It's not that much work.
Oh, well, thank you.
Tourism, balancing all those interests is very careful, and all I ask, I raised two kids here that graduated high school just to see, they love the multicultural facets of Disney. They said they were better people. And when you bring in, my concern is when you bring a lot of hotels and tourists, it's hard to move community forward. You guys walk a very fine line. And so, listening here, and I thank you for everything you do. If you just disagree with me, I just ask for you and figure out what you're doing and make those choices.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Appreciate it.
I really appreciate that. Really listening to
Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
I'll accept them. Yeah, I'll accept a motion to adjourn.
To wish John a happy birthday. Then we can close the meeting.
Thank you.
Happy birthday. Motion.
Motion to adjourn by Karen,
Second?
second by David, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Did I mention it was my birthday? Did I mention it was my birthday? No, Facebook.